A wife works like a maid for her husband. If she doesn't listen to him, they might get divorced. I'm really mad, I told someone. My husband Tom took my special credit card and spent lots of money without asking me. He knew I was busy with work. They're on a vacation overseas. I feel really disrespected. I didn't answer Tom's phone call. Instead, I started planning how to get back at him. I'm Holly Smith. I used to be a famous actress in the USA. People all over the world loved me, and I even made it big in Hollywood. I was famous for many years. But then I got married to Tom, who used to be my manager and helper. He took care of everything for me, from my health to my personal life. He's still helping me with my fashion stores now. I quit acting 10 years ago when I was 21. When I decided to stop acting while I was still really famous, it caused a big stir in the media. Fans were coming to my house, and I was getting tons of letters begging me to keep going. Despite all the gossip and rumors, Tom and I got married happily, and everyone was supportive. Just before I quit acting, I started my own fashion brand. Now, Tom works for me in finance, and I focus on running the business, making sure our models do well. Everything seemed great, but lately Tom's been acting strange. He looks tired and defeated all the time at home. Tom, what's going on? You don't seem yourself. Is something wrong at work? I knew he didn't like talking about his problems, so I always checked in on him. It could be tiring, but he always helped me with my problems too, so I didn't mind. Even though I often felt annoyed, I always valued Tom's efforts. You know, I'm tired of always being in the background, doing what you want, he suddenly said, surprising me. What's going on? You've never said anything like this before. I responded. Tom would sometimes vent his frustrations at me, but it was because he was stressed from work. He acted tough at his job, so maybe he had nowhere else to let off steam. I remembered how I used to snap at him when I was an actress, so I could empathize with how he felt. Still, his words caught me off guard, and I felt my voice trembling as I replied. I've been holding back. You're always busy, and I'm just here supporting you. Even though Tom earned more than most people, he was still just an employee in our company. I made more money, but I never thought it mattered who earned more in a marriage. His words surprised me. Even when you're home, you're always focused on work and hardly pay attention to me. When we go shopping, you just buy whatever you want. How do you think that makes me feel? Tom looked dissatisfied, his lips pressed together like a frustrated child. Honestly, his words irritated me. Most of our household expenses came from my income. His salary was his to spend as he pleased. As I reminded him, it was my way of thanking him for all his support and hard work. There were times when Tom supported me financially, especially when we didn't have much money. I wanted to thank him for all the times he put his own needs aside for me, even until I retired. It hurt to hear him sound ungrateful. The things I buy come from the savings I manage. If anything, I'm the one making sacrifices, I thought angrily. Holly, you have too much free time. I want more time off and to travel leisurely. The salary's good since I joined your company, but I never have time, he complained. When I left acting and started my own business, Tom said he'd keep managing actors. But when my business did well, he wanted to work with me. If I work with you, Holly, you won't be lonely. I want to be there for you, he said. I wanted to spend time with him, so I let him join. I never asked him to, so why was he acting like this? Wasn't our life good enough for him? Wasn't he being too selfish? As I thought this, Tom asked for time off to celebrate his parents' 60th anniversary. Can I have 2 weeks off to take them on a trip to Japan? He asked. They've never been, and I want to show them the tasty food and beautiful sights, he said. I braced myself for his response, but his request surprised me, leaving me feeling uneasy. 2 weeks off seemed like a simple request he could easily make it work without causing any trouble. Our company was fair, and taking time off wasn't usually a problem. Yet here he was, making a big deal about it and negotiating directly with me. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I tried to push aside my irritation and replied calmly, I'm fine with that, but it won't work this year. I have important events lined up, like a fashion show, and preparing for the Paris collection. Maybe we can plan it for next year when my schedule is more flexible. I want to be there for my in-laws celebration, but work is really busy this year. I suggested a different date, but Tom refused with a smile. It's okay, we'll celebrate with my family. I just want some quality family time, he said. His words stung, suggesting that I was a burden. So, what do you think? Don't I deserve some time off too? Tom often spoke without thinking, and while it was one of his flaws, I accepted him as my partner, flaws and all. But I couldn't ignore how his words hurt me, even if he didn't mean it. Why does he talk to me like this? Doesn't he care about me? As I pondered, Tom interrupted, "Hey Holly, are you listening to me?" I owe a lot to Tom's parents. Even though I couldn't visit them often because of work, Tom's parents always treated me like their own daughter and praised my work. "We're so lucky to have such a wonderful daughter," his mother said when I married into the family, and his father celebrated our marriage with joy. It was their 60th anniversary celebration, and I understood their desire to celebrate it this year. But how could I agree happily after being spoken to like that? "It doesn't matter to me, take 1 week or 2, do as you like." I couldn't hide my anger and let it show. This seemed to upset Tom. He got up, visibly upset, and left the room without a word. We had been sleeping in separate bedrooms due to work, and from that day until his trip, we didn't see each other at all. "Is that really true? Isn't your husband being too harsh?" My secretary, noticing my unusual behavior the day Tom left for his trip, pressed me for details. She's an exceptional talent and has been supporting me since I started managing the company. As women, we often see eye to eye, and sometimes she's even more reliable than my husband. She's quick-witted yet caring, always there to support me when I'm down or about to make a mistake. I cherish her like family. She admires me like a real sister, and I often confide in her. Her honest and mature advice, beyond her years, is always valuable. And this time too, she noticed something was off about me and kindly showed concern. I hesitated at first about opening up, but realized keeping it in could affect my work. I decided to tell her everything that happened up to today. She furrowed her brow in anger. "If I were you, I'd have given him a piece of my mind. You've been too soft on your husband, boss. I get that you love him, but you can't let him walk all over you." Her blunt advice, making me wonder who's older, hit me hard. In an environment where everyone tends to hold back from telling me things, she's the only one who treats me as an equal. I really appreciate her directness and the ease we have in our conversations. Being in a higher position often requires humility and restraint, so having someone who can speak honestly with me like she does is incredibly valuable. "You're right. What should I do?" I asked. "Can't you call him? Why not talk after work today? Don't worry about ruining his trip. If things keep going like this, you might end up getting divorced," she urged me, sounding like an older sister, leaving me with no choice but to agree. As she suggested, I plan to call him right after work. He's in Japan, so there's a significant time difference of about 15 hours from the US. For example, if it's 5:00 p.m. here, it's 8:00 a.m. there, which should be around breakfast time. I had sent him an email earlier to let him know I needed to talk, so he should be expecting my call. I tried calling, hoping he would answer, but there was no response. Maybe he's still busy with everyone. I'll try again later. Despite calling every 30 minutes, there was still no answer. Worried, I decided to contact my mother-in-law to check on him. "Hello, Holly, you must be tired. I'm sorry we went on this trip without you. We wanted you to come, but Tom insisted otherwise," she said. I knew Tom's mother used to be strict, but now she's much more caring and always worries about my busy schedule. "It's okay. We're swamped at the company this year, so I couldn't make it. I'll make it up to you next year, all right?" I assured her. "Oh, don't worry about it. Just having this wonderful trip as a gift from you is more than enough for us." Her kind words surprised me. "Wait, a gift?" I asked, confused. She seemed surprised by my question, and then explained that Tom told them the trip was paid for by me since I couldn't join. I was shocked to hear this news. "What?" I exclaimed over the phone. My mother-in-law realized I didn't know anything about it from my reaction and quickly clarified. "Isn't this the trip wholly arranged? Tom paid for everything with Holly's card, so I thought it was from you." The trip included Tom's parents and his sister's family, 5 people in total. The flight alone cost about $1,000 per person minimum, not to mention other expenses, easily exceeding $10,000. It was outrageous to spend such a large amount without consulting me, especially since I usually cover living expenses. Tom doesn't gamble or smoke, so his salary should be intact. He definitely earns enough to afford such expenses, yet he didn't. With him not answering my calls, my anger started to boil. My mother-in-law noticed my distress and spoke with concern. "Holly, are you all right? We'll reimburse every cent." Tom insisted on covering everything, which seemed strange to us. My husband and I decided we'll repay you later. We miss you and plan to visit soon. This trip might have been a mistake. With these words, my mother-in-law tried to reassure me. You're not to blame. It's also your 6th-day celebration, so please use that money for your enjoyment. I'll make sure Tom pays you back, but could you tell me more about how the trip was planned? I'm curious about what Tom was thinking. It dawned on me that this trip must have been meticulously planned months ago, and Tom was using me without my knowledge. In that moment, suspicions about him started to creep in. Then my mother-in-law shared a shocking revelation. The trip was actually suggested by Tom's sister and her husband. To my surprise, it was Tom's sister and her husband, who had always criticized me, who initiated the trip. Tom's brother-in-law, an executive at my rival company, he looked down on me for being a female CEO because of his pride. Tom never stood up to his sister. The sight of Tom being so attentive to someone other than himself, especially M, must have caught my sister-in-law's attention, even though she's always had Tom under her thumb. I couldn't stand the fact that she could be offended by just a slightly friendly gesture from Tom. With their strong rivalry, my sister-in-law and her husband disliked me, and I tried my best to avoid dealing with them as much as possible. The couple, always competitive and disliking me, planned this trip, possibly convincing Tom to pick a fight and exclude me. They waited for the right moment to bring Tom along as a source of money. I'm sorry, I didn't know anything. Tom told me you were busy and asked us not to contact you directly. If my unsuspecting in-laws and I were to communicate, it would reveal the plan, potentially causing problems in our marriage. To prevent this, Tom had to restrict his parents' actions in advance. For my in-laws, who didn't understand how busy I was, Tom's advice was final. They decided to follow his instructions and express their gratitude when they returned. Holly, did you give Tom a card or something? He was paying with a black card I've never seen before, my father-in-law asked, sounding hurried as if he had been eavesdropping. He brought up something that had been on my mind the moment he mentioned a black card. I checked my safe. The black card he referred to was the company's crucial black card, accessible only by Tom and me, who knew the safe's password. I never imagined Tom would stoop to embezzlement, but the card that should have been there was missing. With Tom overseeing finance, it was easy for him to manipulate records and misuse company funds. When I realized this, my anger reached its peak, and I shared the story with my in-laws. They must have been shocked. My mother-in-law turned pale and panicked, saying, "What should we do? Are we involved in this embezzlement? We'll return with Tom immediately. We're just as guilty as he is, even if unknowingly. We'll face the consequences once we're back." My father-in-law, a man of strong responsibility, said. I shook my head, rejecting his words. This was all orchestrated by Tom's sister's family and Tom himself. My in-laws are not to blame. They were just manipulated by Tom. They're not at fault, but I can't let them off the hook. We don't need punishment, but could you help me with something? I've turned a blind eye to Tom's actions until now, and that's my fault. He's taking advantage of me, thinking he can get away with just an apology. This isn't just a marital issue, it's a company issue. We need to teach him a lesson. All right, we'll do whatever we can to help. So we began plotting a revenge plan. I was surprised by my own cunning, but my love for Tom had died. Now only hatred and anger surged through me. Initially, my in-laws were hesitant about this drastic plan, but they also felt responsible for Tom as his parents, and eventually they resolved to support me. As parents, they agreed to be my allies. Amidst this discussion, Tom unexpectedly called. I ended the call with my in-laws and answered Tom's. What's up? We're enjoying a family-only trip. So what's this important talk about? Tom's sarcastic tone only fueled my irritation. You took your time calling. Did you go a little wild, huh? No way. Just having drinks at a nearby bar with Mom and Dad. This confirmed he was lying. I had just spoken to his parents, and there was no noise of a bar in the background. Besides, they had no reason to lie to me. His words erased all the time and trust we had built, and my feelings for him cooled entirely. Oh, really? By the way, Tom, you haven't been tampering with the company's expenses, have you? His demeanor instantly changed at my unexpected question. What's that all about? His usually lighthearted tone turned dead serious. Was this his true nature? Seeing his attitude shift as if he now saw me as an enemy, I faced him with equal firmness. Just checking, since there will be an audit at the company soon. Are you suspecting me? His defensive reaction betrayed his guilt. I couldn't help but chuckle at his feeble response. What's the matter? I was just asking. And now you're talking about suspicion. Have you done something wrong? No, anyway, the house better not be a mess when I get back, okay? Realizing he was only making himself look more suspicious, he quickly changed the subject. His actions only served to raise more suspicion. I almost found his foolishness impressive. Who knows? I've been busy with work too. Cut me some slack. I hate returning to a dirty house full of bugs. They say a wife is her husband's maid. Disobey and it's divorce. Even our executive says that to his wife. Looks like I might have to do the same, huh? You wouldn't want that, so keep the house clean. I had never seen him get along with the executive. His current words were likely his own thoughts, but aware of his weaker position, he used the third person to express them. His pitiful attempt made me sigh. Sure, I'll keep that in mind. There was no need for further conversation. Tom clearly looked down on me, even resorting to embezzling company funds. Embezzlement is a serious crime, and I could report him to the police. No mercy, even for a spouse. But that alone wouldn't satisfy me. After ending the call with Tom, I immediately made a certain phone call. The next day, while busy preparing for the fashion show, I was bombarded with calls. Of course, it was Tom. I noticed his calls late at night while I was out for a reason, accompanied by my secretary. Luckily, she was driving, so I answered Tom's call. You're late. What have you been doing? His voice was more agitated than I'd ever heard, surprising both my secretary and me, who were listening on speaker. What do you mean? I was working. Did you do something yesterday? Do something like what? Don't play dumb. Tell me the truth. What did you do? Tom was in complete panic, and in the background, I could hear several Japanese men confronting him, along with my sister-in-law and her husband. Sounds noisy. Is everything okay? No, it's just... Tom, who had been blustering, suddenly began to stammer. He realized that admitting anything would put him in a very disadvantageous position. His odd behavior prompted me to reveal what I had done the day before, as it was time to make him taste despair. Too bad, Tom. You were supposed to be having a blast in Japan. But it seems your dream turned into a nightmare overnight. Huh? But it's what you deserve for misusing someone else's money. You did something, didn't you? As he reacted strangely, I disclosed my actions from the previous day. I reached out to the president of the credit card company I had a long-standing relationship with, even though it was after hours. He agreed to assist me immediately. He promptly suspended the company's credit card. When a credit card is misused, the company isn't obligated to pay the store, leaving the store at a loss. However, since Tom had arranged to pay the entire bill at checkout, with the card blocked, he couldn't settle the payment and was now facing interrogation by the hotel receptionists. Tom, Mom, and Dad have already checked out. The taxi I arranged for them has left with them. So there's no one coming to pick you up. My sister-in-law, feeling trapped, bombarded Tom, asking what to do next. Hearing this, Tom panicked even more and directed his anger at me. How could you do this and think it's okay? Are you ready for a divorce? Fine. I'd rather not be married to someone who embezzles company funds. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and we're proceeding with divorce proceedings. What? Tom was visibly shaken by my calm demeanor. I've overlooked so much of your behavior, Tom. There was a time when you supported my work, and I appreciated that. But I've reached my limit. My patience has run out. That can't be. Realizing he was in a dire situation, Tom finally understood my anger and let out a pitiful cry. The receptionist relentlessly demanded payment from Tom and his group, who were now cornered in despair. But none of them could speak Japanese, relying on a guide for communication. Listening to their plight, I suggested switching the call to me. No one there speaks Japanese, right? Let me talk to them for you. You're going to help? Of course. Tom must have thought I had a change of heart. Realizing his mistake, without hesitation, he handed his phone to them. I explained the situation to the receptionist in Japanese, and they quickly understood, seeming quite cooperative. To alleviate their concerns, I also provided them with my contact information, which my secretary noted down. They happily agreed to my proposal. After a brief conversation, they returned the phone to Tom. What happened? Did you sort it out? Yes, I've taken care of it. Now it's up to you guys. Really? You're a lifesaver, Holly. I love you. He then hurried off, apparently called by the receptionists. Clueless, Tom ended the call and followed them. Are you sure about this? It probably won't end well. Exactly. It's perfect for them to experience some hardship. An hour later, as expected, I received a barrage of calls from Tom again. When I answered, Tom's voice was filled with pitiful anguish. Holly, what's happening here? Where are we? Explain yourself and come help us right now. Crying out, he showed me via video call the image of a slum area in Osaka, Japan. The sight was shocking. Tom and his sister's family were stripped of their belongings and in a pitiful state. Caught by those individuals, being taken to what's considered the most dangerous place in Japan was honestly unexpected. When I spoke to the receptionist, he mentioned, I'm a big fan of yours. I'll arrange a harsh punishment, just leave it to me. But I never anticipated it would be this severe. I couldn't help but laugh at the unexpected turn of events. You're lucky to be alive in Japan's most dangerous place. It's quite a miracle. What? Wait, Holly, what's going on? Explain yourself and come help us right now. Since it's a video call, they could probably hear everything clearly. Surrounding Tom and his group were homeless individuals, causing a stir. You folks caused trouble for Holly. Now face the consequences. Time to reflect. My in-laws chimed in, surprising everyone. What's going on? A friend of Holly flew us back on a private jet. We're back in the US and Holly picked us up. We realized you were trying to set Holly up. We told her to do whatever she wants with you guys. As they spoke, the onlookers behind them began confronting Tom's sister and her husband. The homeless folks were ruthless. If you had anything valuable, even women weren't spared. They were shouting while on the video call. In such a dangerous place, it's no wonder they became prime targets. I addressed the crowd in Japanese, telling them loudly that these men had used my card illegally and mistreated me. Every night, I urged them to do whatever they pleased with them. The locals, eager to join in, gladly agreed to make things difficult for them. Suddenly, the call ended, perhaps because someone grabbed the phone. Tom and his group were left in the dangerous neighborhood, terrorized daily and treated like slaves by the locals. Without money to return to the US, they were essentially stuck abroad. I confirmed the subsequent events with the hotel reception. Apparently, an acquaintance of the receptionist was a boss in the area and agreed to take care of Tom and his group in exchange for me treating him to some good liquor next time, assuring me not to worry. The deal was made under the condition that they would be protected from life-threatening situations. In return, I agreed to sing at the hotel, something I hadn't done in a long time. Your live performance video was the only one you ever released when you were active. It's still my treasure. As a token of thanks, come stay at our hotel and sing for us. I'll make sure you're treated like a VIP. With the help of the men from the hotel, I successfully got revenge on Tom and his group. I also managed to divorce Tom. I felt rejuvenated and have been enjoying life with my in-laws. Tom's sister and her husband were fired for unexcused absences from work. Their phones were taken by the locals, leaving them without a means to contact anyone. My in-laws explained the situation well, so it didn't become a police matter, and no one seemed to care about them. Thus, my ties with Tom were completely severed. Since then, I've been focusing on work and living a happy life. Occasionally, I check on Tom and his group through the receptionist. They're still enduring harsh conditions, but I don't feel any sympathy for them. I asked for their lives to be spared, and now I'm relishing my life to the fullest.
My husband Matthew, who has Parkinson's disease, and I are treated as nuisances by my son John's wife, Emily. When we ran out of the money we had saved for our retirement, Emily secretly changed the locks and shut us out. In despair, Matthew and I set out on a journey with nowhere to go. But Matthew's one line, "Why don't we try going to Utopia?" was the turning point that began our life's reversal. My name is Rachel. I'm 66 years old. I live in a small house in the suburbs of Boston with Matthew, John, and his wife, Emily, and their daughter, Kristen. A few years ago, Matthew was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and ever since, I've been taking care of him at home. Matthew's condition has progressed quite a bit. It's difficult for him to stand or walk, and he needs help with daily activities. When we go out, he usually uses a wheelchair. Matthew has always hated hospitals, and no matter how much I worried and said something, he would insist, "It's normal to have some health problems after turning 60. He refused to go to the doctor. And by the time we realized it, his symptoms had worsened. He started having trouble walking, and there were several times when he lost his balance and fell while moving around the house. He himself thought something was wrong and finally went to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The treatment for Parkinson's is primarily medication, which costs about $150 a month. Matthew used to run a small car repair shop, but since John had no intention of taking over, he became a salaried worker, and the shop was closed when Matthew retired at 65. Looking back now, I think he was already feeling the effects of Parkinson's back then, and working had become too exhausting for him. John got married 8 years ago at the age of 30 to a woman 5 years younger who worked at the same company. At that time, Matthew was still working, and I had a part-time job as well. Until Kristen was born, we had a comfortable life with 4 incomes supporting us. After Kristen was born and Emily became a housewife, and later when Matthew retired and we lived on a pension, our financial situation started to become tighter. Even so, we still had some savings, so we didn't take it too seriously. But when Matthew was diagnosed with Parkinson's and required assistance for his daily life, I quit my part-time job, and Kristen started going to elementary school. It was around that time Emily began voicing her complaints. "We're going to have to pay for our child's education in the future, and now we're stuck supporting 2 elderly people. What are we supposed to do?" She began saying things like that to our faces. Matthew and I together receive about $1.3K in pension benefits a month. From that, we have to cover treatment and medication costs. We could have delayed taking the pension and increased the amount later, but we needed the cash now, not tens of thousands of dollars 5 years down the road. Thankfully, the house was paid off, so at least we didn't have to worry about housing costs. Out of our small pension, Emily made us promise to contribute $1K a month for food and living expenses. And after paying for treatment and medication, we had very little left. And then Emily would say things like, "It's common sense for grandparents to buy the things their grandkids need for school. Kristen wants to take swimming lessons, so you'll need to pay for the monthly fees." As if it was completely natural. And she always ended with, "You do have savings, right? But that is our retirement savings. It is said that you need around $1M for retirement, but we couldn't manage to save that much. Still, John and his wife live with us, and we have a house. I thought that our expenses in retirement would be less than living on our own and paying rent. I responded to Emily's requests and started dipping into the $500K savings Matthew and I had when he retired. John was completely controlled by Emily. "I'm sorry, Mom." And he would always apologize to me. "I'm almost about to get promoted to manager. Things will get easier then, so please hold on until that happens." John, although weak in spirit, was always kind. When Parkinson's disease sets in, muscles stiffen, making movement difficult, and the facial expressions become more rigid. But Matthew had always been the quiet and expressionless type, and honestly, I liked that about him. When Matthew, who usually had a blunt and aloof attitude, occasionally said something kind or did something thoughtful, it made me unbelievably happy. When he developed Parkinson's and I started helping him with his daily life, he began to thank me more frequently, even if only a little more than before. Oddly enough, our conversations as a couple became more frequent. And okay, giving is tough in many ways. Always being by Matthew's side and doing things for him never felt like a burden to me. Unfortunately, John's promotion was postponed. The most outraged by this was Emily. It wasn't because John had done anything wrong, but it seemed he got caught up in the company's internal politics. "You said you were getting promoted in spring. I thought we could easily pay off the loans. And now what are we supposed to do?" she shouted at John. They had upgraded their appliances and bought clothes for both themselves and their children, expecting John's promotion and salary increase. The total came to around $1K in monthly payments. I thought they should have waited until the promotion was official to make those purchases, but it wasn't something I could say. John was being blamed so harshly that I couldn't help but say, "Loans come with interest. It's a waste of money. I'll pay it off from our savings in one lump sum." But this wasn't a good idea. As John was scolded, Emily started to expect that I, as the mother-in-law, would step in and cover the expenses. And before I knew it, our savings were rapidly dwindling. "Emily, our savings are almost gone. I can't keep giving money like before." When I said that, Emily's attitude toward Matthew and me grew cold. Well, it wasn't like she had been warm to us before, either. Kristen, my granddaughter, who used to visit us often, eat snacks together, or play with origami, no longer came near us. One day, Kristen, a friend, gifted me some nice snacks. "Would you like to eat them together?" I invited her, but the response I received was shocking. "I don't want to get sick. Parkinson's disease isn't something you can catch from someone else." "Are you talking about Matthew's illness? It doesn't spread, you know, don't worry." I said this, but Kristen responded, "Mom told me not to go near him." Then she ran off. I was shocked. If I told Matthew this, it would break his heart. "Kristen hasn't visited in a while," Matthew said, looking a little down. "Well, she's 6 now. She's probably busy playing with her friends." I lied to him. When Kristen started elementary school, Emily said, "We have to start saving more for Kristen's education." And she decided to pick up a part-time job for a few hours during the day. "Leave the housework to me. It's not like Matthew needs constant care," I said, hoping for some gratitude. "That's the least you could do." Instead, she just spat back. "Right before Kristen's summer break, we're planning a family trip to show Kristen the ocean. Would you mind helping with the travel expenses?" Emily asked me. The family she was talking about didn't include Matthew or myself. We barely have any savings left. I told her, "This will be the last time, I promise. I'm working part-time now, so we'll be fine," she said with a sweet smile, almost too polite. And I ended up giving her $1,000 from what little savings we had left. Now our savings were down to less than $10,000. In the mornings, I'd finish cleaning and doing laundry. On nice days, I'd take Matthew out in his wheelchair to the nearby park. We would take slow walks around the park, and then sit down at one of the shaded gazebos with our packed lunch and a pot of coffee. Afterward, we'd take another leisurely stroll before heading back home. But that day, when we got back, the door was locked, and the house seemed completely empty. It was the start of summer vacation, and since Emily was off from her part-time job, I thought maybe she had gone shopping. I slid the key into the lock and tried to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. "That's strange," I thought to myself, trying several more times, but the door refused to open. Then, as I looked down, I noticed a white envelope stuck in the crack of the door. I picked it up and read the note inside. "We're going on a family vacation for 4 days." It was written in Emily's handwriting. This can't be happening. I knew they were planning a family trip for the summer, but I hadn't been told they were leaving today. Had we just been locked out? Did they really go so far as to change the locks right before their vacation? They're telling us to leave, aren't they? Matthew spoke quietly. I was at a complete loss, fumbling and unsure of what to do. Both Matthew and I had lost our parents, and we didn't have any close relatives to turn to. "It's all because I got sick. I'm sorry." Matthew apologized, his voice heavy with guilt. "This isn't your fault. Families are supposed to help each other in times like these, aren't they? They don't want us. We're just a burden to them. That's how our family must see us now." Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd face such a heartbreaking, humiliating situation in my old age. I was overwhelmed with sadness and anger, and tears streamed down my face. In hindsight, I suppose we could have called a locksmith, but at the time, I was too shocked to think clearly. Maybe we should just go on a trip ourselves. Just the two of us, somewhere far away. Matthew suggested softly. That might not be such a bad idea. Just the two of us, going far away, where no one knows us. We could spend the last of our $10K savings and enjoy it until it runs out. And after that, we could go even farther. Who knows where? Without any particular destination in mind, Matthew and I boarded a long-distance bus. The bus was filled with happy families, all excited for their vacations. We were probably the only ones on board who had no real destination. Matthew had been silent for most of the ride, but as he gazed out the window at the passing scenery, he finally spoke. "I've got it. How about we spend the rest of our lives in a utopia?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A utopia. All I could picture was some kind of heavenly place. Matthew explained that when he was around 20, he went on a solo trip and stumbled upon a village that he believed was a true utopia. It was perfect. The scenery was beautiful. The people were kind. The food was amazing, and they even had hot springs. If Matthew wanted to go there, I wasn't going to argue. We had nowhere else to go, after all. Relying on Matthew's faded memories, we took several buses and eventually arrived in Colorado. From there, we boarded another bus that took us up into the mountains. As we stepped off the bus, the driver mentioned that this was the last bus heading back to the station for the day. I think he was worried about an elderly couple in wheelchairs, but Matthew reassured him, "We're going further up. Thank you though." The bus drove off, leaving us alone. We walked for about 15 minutes, pushing our wheelchairs along a narrow road, barely wide enough for cars to pass each other. Even though it was summer, the sun was already setting, and the road was deserted. The growing darkness and isolation began to make me uneasy. Just then, a soft honk came from behind us, and a small pickup truck appeared from the direction of the bus stop. "Where are you folks heading?" A man in his 50s, driving the truck, called out to us. I wanted to go to the utopia ahead. When Matthew said that, the man in the mini truck laughed heartily and replied, "Ahaha, utopia, huh, sounds great. Hop in. At this pace, you'll be there by midnight." The man picked up Matthew, gently placing him in the passenger seat, and then handed me the cushion he'd been sitting on. "Sorry, it's just the truck bed. Hold on tight, okay?" With that, the man started up the mini truck. It was my first time ever riding in the back of a truck. Holding onto Matthew's wheelchair, which had been placed beside me, I couldn't help but feel a little excited. The mini truck finally stopped in front of a large, old house. The man unloaded the wheelchair from the back and helped me down, then carefully lifted Matthew into the chair and led us into the house. Inside was surprisingly modern, completely unexpected given the rustic exterior. "I'd say it's been about 50 years, wouldn't you, Matthew?" The man said this so casually that I was taken aback. Matthew, my husband, smiled at the man. He remembered Matthew's visit nearly 50 years ago. His name was Andrew, and though he appeared to be in his 50s, he later revealed he was 64. "You remembered well." Matthew looks happy. "Of course I remember. Matthew, you're my savior." He had been only 14 years old when Matthew had visited the village. At that time, Andrew was uncertain about his future. I was torn between taking over the family farm or pursuing art. I wanted to go to the city to study painting. While Andrew was struggling with this decision, Matthew, during his travels, had come across the village and praised Andrew's artwork. His paintings were truly remarkable. He depicted nature, but with a perspective and sensitivity that were entirely his own. Matthew reminisced, his eyes narrowing as he spoke fondly of the past. Matthew told me that I wouldn't be able to paint like that if I went to the city. I was uncertain, but I decided to stay here in my hometown and continue painting. Now that I think about it, several canvases were stacked in the corner of the living room. My careless words influenced your whole life, huh? Matthew looked slightly apologetic, but Andrew laughed heartily. "No way. You may not know this, but I'm actually quite a successful artist, thanks to you, Matthew." Andrew then showed us some of his artwork. Just as Matthew had said, they were nature-themed but somewhat abstract, bursting with vitality and energy. rather than peaceful and still. "Oh, Andrew S. I think I've seen that name in a bank somewhere," I exclaimed when I saw the signature on the painting. Andrew grinned proudly. He truly was a famous artist. Andrew chuckled. Afterward, Andrew led us to the bathroom. When he realized that Matthew would need help showering, he said, "Well then, I'll hop in with you." Before I could react, Andrew and Matthew disappeared into the bathroom. "It's amazing. It's a hot spring," Matthew said, his cheeks slightly flushed as he came out of the bathroom. "This area is known for its hot springs. So many homes have them. It's got all sorts of healing properties. Really good water," Andrew explained with a smile. The bathroom was designed like a luxurious semi-outdoor spa you'd find in a famous American resort. I could stretch out my legs and fully relax, something I hadn't done in a long time. When I finished my shower and stepped out, Andrew had prepared a homemade meal for us. The fish and vegetables he served were unbelievably delicious. "This is almost free, you know," Andrew said proudly. He had caught the fish in a nearby river and picked fresh vegetables from the surrounding mountains. Apparently, most of the food here except the meat was locally sourced, as there were families raising their own chickens and running small farms. We sipped on some local wine he offered, and slowly, we began to share the story of why we came to this village. "That's unbelievable. How could John's wife do that? After everything, to treat an older person who's worked so hard their whole life like that. Doesn't she realize she's going to get old one day too?" Andrew, upset on our behalf, was clearly angry. "Stay here as long as you like. In fact, why don't you just move here and live in the village?" he said kindly. Andrew's parents were still alive, and they farmed rice nearby. As for Andrew, he had been married when he was younger, but after 10 years, he got divorced and was now single. "I love people, but apparently, I wasn't cut out to be a husband," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "This village is a great place, but it can get pretty boring. Honestly, I'm always happy to have visitors. Matthew, let's go fishing tomorrow," he said, making plans with Matthew before leading us to the guest room. The next morning, when I woke up around 6 a.m., the two men had already left for their fishing trip. Being the only one left behind, I decided to clean up as a small way to say thank you. Though the house was somewhat tidy, it wasn't thoroughly clean in every corner. It had the feeling of a bachelor's home. At the far end of the single-story house was Andrew's studio. As soon as I opened the door, the nostalgic smell of paint filled the air, reminding me of something I had completely forgotten. I used to be in the art club in school. I thought to myself, as the memory came rushing back, realizing the studio was probably Andrew's personal sanctuary. I closed the door quietly without touching anything. The two men returned shortly after noon, with their cooler full of fish. "Matthew, you've got a real talent for fishing," Andrew complimented him. "Well, I'm sick, so I'm pretty good at staying still and waiting," Matthew joked, making us all burst into laughter. Even though his illness was tough, it felt nice to share a laugh like this together. We prepared the freshly caught fish and had them for lunch. When we had gone for a walk the day before, I had brought Matthew's medicine along in a pack, so we were fine for the next few days. But staying longer would mean we'd eventually have to deal with refilling prescriptions and seeing doctors. Sensing our concern, "There's a big hospital about an hour's drive from here. We can go tomorrow if you'd like," Andrew offered. He really had been taking care of us in every way, and Matthew and I both felt a little overwhelmed by his kindness. "Let's not argue about that. I had a great time today, and you even helped with cleaning. I should be the one thanking you." I ended up getting told that, and so began our strange living arrangement with Matthew and Andrew. When I offered to take care of the cleaning and cooking, Andrew enthusiastically replied, "That would be great. I don't hate cooking, but I'm so tired of making meals just for myself and eating alone." He really welcomed the idea. "Sure, the house bath is nice, but there's a real hot spring nearby too." Andrew showed us around the hot spring and even introduced us to his parents, who lived about 10 minutes away. His parents remembered Matthew and said, "Thanks to you, Andrew has grown up well and even built us a new house." For some reason, they were thanking us. Matthew, who was just a young traveler passing through, looked shy and embarrassed. His expression seemed more lively than usual. Their house was a stylish, single-story, barrier-free design, quite the contrast to the old house Andrew lived in. "The old house just sparks my imagination more," Andrew said in a very artist-like manner. Before I knew it, several days had passed. Suddenly, I heard my smartphone ring. The screen said John. It seemed he had returned from the 4-day family trip. I answered the phone. "Mom, where are you right now? I came home, and both of you are gone, and the house has been closed up for days." Hearing that, I suddenly remembered I might have left the kitchen trash as it was. In the summer heat, the house being closed up for 4 days would have turned it into quite a disaster. "Haven't you talked to Emily? The day you left for the trip, Matthew and I were locked out of the house." "What?" "When we got back from our walk, the locks had been changed, and we couldn't get in." "You're kidding, right? Why? Why would someone do that?" "I guess we were just in the way. But it's fine now. We're in Utopia." "What? What are you talking about, Mom?" "Utopia. Wait, don't tell me." John seemed to be imagining the worst. "Don't jump to conclusions. Matthew and I are fine, really. You just keep doing your thing." With that, I ended the call. John tried calling several more times, but I decided to ignore him. One day, I noticed Andrew was working on something in the kitchen. He was simmering something in a pot, but it didn't look like food. "I'm making natural pigments. I want to see what happens if I paint with only natural ingredients." He was making paint from things like berries, spinach, beets, and marigolds. After painting with the pigments he made, it doesn't have quite the impact I was hoping for. Maybe it didn't turn out as well as I thought. Andrew tilted his head and said, "I think the soft colors look lovely." I told him, "Rachel, want to try drawing something?" He handed me a sketchbook. "What? Remember when you first cleaned up, you said I didn't touch the studio because it's your sacred space. And you always have this painterly look on your face when you're looking at my artwork." "No, it's nothing like that. I was just in the art club in high school." "Come on, we've got all the time in the world. Just try drawing something." Truthfully, I was more than a little interested, so I gratefully accepted the offer to draw. Andrew looked at the painting I had made and said, "Wow, this is amazing. It's so gentle and warm. The natural pigments really fit well. I could never paint something like this." Hearing his praise made me incredibly happy. After that, I started going to the mountains to gather plants that I thought could be used to make pigments, and it became a hobby of mine to create paints and make art. Every day, between cleaning, doing the laundry, and cooking, I would paint whenever I had a free moment. Andrew and Matthew both enjoyed the meals I made, and every day felt like the long, carefree summer vacations of my childhood. As for Matthew, he began to be asked by the neighbors to fix cars, machines, and electrical issues. He used to run an auto repair shop, so he was skilled with those kinds of repairs. The neighbors, knowing about Matthew's illness, always said, "Take your time, no rush at all." They were kind and considerate of his condition. Matthew would come back with vegetables or fresh eggs as a thank you for his work. He would grin and say proudly, "I got some freshly laid eggs today." Matthew had become much healthier. In fact, he hardly needed any assistance in his daily life anymore. Maybe the hot springs helped, or maybe it's because we live such a stress-free life now. Parkinson's disease is still so mysterious, and there's so much about the human brain we don't understand yet. So it wouldn't be surprising if a miracle occurred. It's the miracle of Utopia. We both said that and felt truly joyful. John still called occasionally, but Matthew would say, "Don't answer. I can't believe he married that woman. He's completely disowned." It felt like we were the ones who had been disowned, but I was also done with worrying about John and his family. So I decided to send John a letter saying, "We're both doing well, so no need to worry. I've been painting recently." I included a drawing with the letter. I didn't include our address, from Utopia, only signing it. After that, I started sending letters every 3 months or so, and the phone calls from John stopped. It was now the 5th summer of our life in Utopia. One day, out of the blue, I'm having an exhibition in Boston soon, and I was thinking of showing some of your work to Rachel. Andrew said. I was completely taken aback. "Oh no, I can't. My paintings are just a hobby." I tried to refuse, but Andrew insisted. "Rachel, your work is wonderful. It's gentle and warm, and you paint animals, flowers, and people, right? I think it would really resonate with people." It was true that I mainly painted semi-wild cats that came around for food, the chickens and cows from the nearby houses, the flowers blooming in the area, and the kind villagers who were always so welcoming. Andrew said, "Let's put a price on them." So I hesitantly suggested, maybe $20 per painting. I thought I was being bold with that price, but he immediately rejected it. Even 10 times that amount would still be cheap. Andrew went ahead and set prices based on the size of each painting. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would have an exhibition in Boston. For the occasion, I put on a formal dress that I had prepared. Matthew and Andrew stood by my side, both in tuxedos. I thought, "Isn't this outfit too much?" But as soon as I saw the atmosphere of the art gallery and the people coming in, I was glad I dressed up properly. On top of that, we even got interviewed by a magazine, and both Matthew and I were thrilled. The article is supposed to be titled, "A 70-year-old rookie artist living in Utopia with her Parkinson's husband." It feels a bit. No, actually, it feels incredibly exploitative. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the right words. And to my surprise, every single one of the 15 pieces I had displayed at my 2-day solo exhibition sold. As I stared at the sold stickers being slapped onto my paintings one after another, Andrew said, "See, I told you. Yours are selling better than mine." The truth is, my paintings sold because of Andrew's name value. Even though I sold more, in terms of money, Andrew made at least 10 times more than I did. People can't afford Andrew's work, but they see that the person exhibiting with him has pieces for tens of thousands of dollars. So they think, well, might as well get one. Matthew said, and he was probably right. "Oh, no, I mean, your paintings are great too," Matthew quickly added, trying to explain himself, looking surprisingly healthy for someone with Parkinson's. In his tuxedo, which I had never seen him wear before, he looked rather dashing. Just then, a voice called out from behind us, "Mom, Dad too." It was John and Emily, and they had brought Kristen with them. "Wait, is that really Rachel?" "No way. What are you doing having an exhibition in Boston?" Emily exclaimed. Apparently, the web version of the interview we did on the first day had been published that same day, and John had stumbled upon it. No wonder there were more visitors today than on the first day. "Oh my gosh, I had no idea Rachel had this kind of talent," Emily said, glancing around the gallery and the people attending. "Dad, Mom, I'm so glad to see you both looking well." John's eyes were filled with tears as he spoke. "Grandma, Grandpa, I remember you," said Kristen, touching Matthew's and my arms. "The last time I saw her, she was only 6 years old, but now Kristen was 11. Meanwhile, Emily wandered around the gallery on her own. "Wow, everything sold. So Rachel, how much did you make from all this?" she asked rudely. "So you're Emily, the one who threw Matthew and Rachel out. You're exactly the way I imagined." Emily was caught off guard by Andrew's sudden comment. "And now you're showing up here, acting all bold. You've got some nerve." He smiled, but his words were biting. "Who the hell are you?" "This is the main artist of this exhibition. Matthew and I have been under his care." "Oh, Rachel, you look younger, don't you? Guess living with 2 men makes you feel young again, huh?" What a disgusting thing for her to say. Not everyone is as low as you. Matthew, who had been silent until now, raised his voice, causing the room to fall silent. Anyway, let's not do this here. Andrew guided us all to the back room. The real reason we came today was, well, I wanted to see that Dad and Mom were doing okay. John hesitated for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words, then took a deep breath and spoke clearly. I'm thinking about getting a divorce. What? Everyone nearby was stunned. Why are you saying something so ridiculous out of nowhere? Emily didn't seem to take him seriously. You finally see your dad after all this time, and all you can talk about is money. Why do you need so much? Are you giving it to that guy? Huh? What are you talking about? They're saying at Kristen's school that you're having an affair with a guy from your part-time job. What? Once again, everyone was shocked. Kristen was looking down, biting her lip. One of Emily's coworkers, whose child is in Kristen's class, had apparently told her kid, "Your mom is cheating, isn't she? My mom says your mom's the worst. Your mom's planning on leaving you and your dad behind, isn't she?" These were the kinds of things being said at school. I can't believe a mother would tell her child something like that, but because of it, Kristen had been getting bullied at school. That's a lie. It's just nasty rumors. Emily refused to admit it. I knew you'd say that, so I hired a private investigator. John said as he laid some evidence photos on the table. They showed Emily arm in arm with a muscular man in his 40s, entering a hotel in broad daylight. What is this? Sneaking around like that? How cowardly of you! Ignoring her own actions, Emily lashed out at John, calling him a coward. The one sneaking around was you. I've put up with everything, how you treated Mom and Dad, your spending habits, but I can't take it anymore. It felt like John, normally calm and gentle, was finally letting out a cry from the depths of his soul. He spread out the divorce papers on the table right there. A few months later, the divorce was finalized, and John moved to Utopia with Kristen. Emily had thrown a huge fit, but Andrew introduced John to a good lawyer, and in the end, Emily was kicked out of the house with almost nothing. Savings are marital property. She'd been screaming, but the credit card debt she'd racked up and the compensation for the affair were deducted from the savings, leaving Emily with not a single cent. Her lover lost interest in her once the money was gone and walked away. Emily became unwelcome at her part-time job and, too ashamed to return to her parents' house, ended up cleaning rooms at a rural hotel where she could live on site. It was her own fault, but from now on, she would grow old alone. If you and Kristen are going to stay here, there's an empty house not too far from here. Why don't you renovate it and move in? Andrew suggested. Yay, let's sell the old place. Matthew agreed, and it looked like they'd have more than enough for the renovation. John was a little worried about his job and Kristen's school, but Kristen was happy to attend a new middle school, especially after the trouble she had in elementary school. In this village, the residents take turns driving the kids to school in town. Each family can pick up their kids at the bus stop on the way back home. The real concern is John, though, since it's going to be pretty hard for him to make a living from farming now. We can drive into town in about 40 minutes, and if you're not too picky, there are plenty of jobs around. He didn't seem to miss his old job too much. Oh, in that case, would you like to be the manager for me and Rachel? Our last dual exhibit was well received, and we want to do more events, but I'm not great with the administrative side of things. Andrew suddenly suggested, I'd love to build a website to get more eyes on our work, but I'm not very tech savvy. Oh, I used to handle website creation for the marketing department at my old company. Something unexpected came up in the conversation. Great. Rachel, let's get cracking and make some more art. Wait, me too. Of course, you're a 70-year-old rookie artist. Apparently, there have even been a few inquiries from people interested in purchasing my art. I never imagined that life after 70 would hold such opportunities for me. This really has been a paradise for us, hasn't it? Matthew said, relaxing in our newly renovated home. Lately, He's been helping with odd jobs for the neighbors, leisurely tending the field next to our house, cooking meals, and even helping with the cleaning. John's idea to sell postcards and merchandise featuring my artwork online is doing surprisingly well, too. Right now, I'm working on my first major piece, an illustration of the 5 of us, including Andrew, seen from behind. I'm still deciding whether to title it A Family Portrait or Utopia. I'm divorcing you because I got an employee pregnant, and I'm going to give her the position of being the company president's wife, my husband Hector said, without a hint of guilt, thrusting the divorce papers in front of me. Are you serious? She's only 23, right? I might have felt a bit of affection for my husband of 30 years, Hector, but he trampled over my feelings with ease. Are you joking? Unlike you, a housewife, I'm the president of a company. His usual attitude dried up any love I had for him completely, and my heart, now empty, filled with hatred. Okay, I understand. And with that, our 30 years of marriage came to an end. He really doesn't understand anything, does he? He's so impulsive, saying I wouldn't care if he regretted anything that happened afterward. I signed the divorce papers. Then, 2 weeks after the divorce, I kept quiet, but that girl you got pregnant. What? Hector, who had a lavish wedding ceremony abroad, was about to learn a terrible truth. My name is Gloria. I am 56 years old, the same age as my husband, Hector, who runs a company. Hector and I met at a party. Coming from the countryside, all my classmates were either married or had children already. I wasn't exactly in a rush, but seeing my close friends' families, I yearned for a family of my own, especially since I was raised by my grandparents after my parents died when I was young. To be honest, I wasn't very close to my grandparents, probably because my father had eloped with their only daughter, my mom. So, I always dreamed of building a bright and happy family of my own. And then, by chance, I met him at a party. Having grown up in a single-parent family, I can understand your feelings to some extent. By the way, I'm thinking of starting a company and would like to do it with you, Gloria. Would you date me? I think we could make it work together with someone as intelligent and goal-oriented as you. His sincere words attracted me, and we started dating. That's when my fate began to spiral out of control. We dated with the intention of marrying, and eventually got married at the age of 26. 30 years have passed since then, just the 2 of us. We don't have children, because we were not blessed with any. We married at a good age, and started preconception care when we were both 30, after the conversation about establishing his company had settled. But it didn't work out. He seems to believe that the reason for not getting pregnant always lies with the woman. The first half year felt normal, but as time passed, 1 year, 2 years, his attitude worsened. There must be something wrong with you for not being able to get pregnant. Go get yourself checked out. I know a guy who runs a gynecology clinic. Go to him, he said. I really didn't want to. He made it sound simple. But gynecology is a very delicate field. I would have been slightly okay if the doctor was a stranger, but the idea of going to someone he knew made me uncomfortable. I said I'd prefer to see my regular doctor, and he frowned and started complaining. Does that mean you don't trust my acquaintance? It's not that. I didn't say that. It's just that my regular doctor knows my body better. Fine, do whatever you want, but don't expect me to deal with whatever happens later. Angry, he left somewhere. Despite upsetting him, I strongly felt that I should be able to choose my own doctor and proceeded as planned. The result was that there was nothing wrong with me. But to know for sure whether it was infertility, he needed to be tested too, which I suggested. Yet, this only made him more upset. There's no way I'm infertile. What an irresponsible thing for a doctor to say. This is exactly the problem. If we had gone to my acquaintance from the start, none of this would have happened. But it's too late now. I've decided that the failure of the preconception care is your fault, so deal with it yourself. This was how the issue of preconception care remained unresolved, and we just dragged it along until we were over 40. I was open to the idea of having children if I could get pregnant, but it seemed Hector wasn't. He seemed to think it was embarrassing to get pregnant after 40. And from that time on, we lived together as a couple, but as if we were complete strangers to each other. Still, as a company owner, he needed a successor. So, we decided to adopt a child with no relatives and welcome him as our own. Our son's name is Jeffrey. He grew up to be honest, kind, and principled. He is now 21 years old. He is attending university while being groomed as the successor to Hector's company. Now that I'm 56, I started to think seriously about the future when a shocking incident occurred. Nice to meet you. I'm Stella. The president always takes such good care of me. She greeted me in a drawn-out manner, a new employee at Hector's company. Her appearance added another worry to my list. My first impression of Stella was that she was a beauty who would fit right into the glamorous world. She had sharp features, a good figure, and seemed to be about 5'5" tall. She had worked as a model while in college, I heard. She's not modeling now since she joined Hector's company as a new employee, but she still has an unmistakable aura. The reason she came to greet me was that she moved into the house next door. The apartment next to ours is rented entirely as company housing, primarily for single employees. Stella, living alone, preferred it for its cheaper rent compared to regular apartments. Everyone knows that the company president's house is next to the company housing. So at first, I thought Stella had simply come over to greet us. But unexpectedly, she made a shocking statement. Just between us, I think the president really likes me. During my interview, he complimented my looks a lot, and I come from a pretty good university. Oh, were you a high school graduate? Haha, sorry about that. Her words clearly looked down on me, making me tremble with anger. Education is just a part of the process to me. If it doesn't lead to results, it doesn't mean much. That's how I see it. Sparks flew between me and Stella. I've always been competitive and can't help responding to unpleasant comments. In elementary school, I was often teased by classmates for being raised by my grandparents. I didn't want to drag that bitter feeling forever, so I made sure to express my dislike clearly. Stella, perhaps not expecting me to retort, was momentarily taken aback. However, an unexpected ally appeared. Oh, isn't that Stella? How's work? Getting used to it? It was Hector. Of course, he wasn't on my side, but supported Stella, whom he favored. Gloria, stop being so childish. Isn't it embarrassing for the wife of the president? This is why I don't want to introduce you in front of everyone. Don't make me ashamed any more than this, okay? Yeah, I got it. He has always been like this, always putting me down and never once standing by my side. The reason I still live with him is because of Jeffrey. He is a junior in college, and he has a little over a year left. But once he enters society, I thought it might be time to end things with him. That means I only need to endure for less than 2 more years. And so, I continued this false marriage with him. However, the arrival of this new employee, Stella, would unexpectedly derail my plans. Not long after Stella moved into the company housing, I discovered something significant. Ugh, Hector, do you really like me that much? Of course, I prefer a young girl like you over an old hag any day. You're so cute, and I love you. That day, Hector had said he couldn't come home because of an important business deal. So I decided to eat out alone. Being by myself for the first time in a while, I thought I'd enjoy a drink. While walking through the urban hub, I witnessed Stella and Hector walking arm in arm, and I was speechless when I saw the building they entered. Hector was definitely having an affair with Stella. Since then, I've been quietly making certain moves, of course, without letting them realize it. Months later, Hector said with a creepy smile, "I got an employee pregnant, so I'm divorcing you. The position of being the company president's wife will go to her." The employee, that girl he referred to, was undoubtedly Stella. I understood instantly. I just glared at him in silence. Then, without showing any remorse, he thrust the divorce papers in front of me. "Are you serious? She's only 23, right? Plus, a new employee getting pregnant by the president and taking over as his wife is unheard of. None of that matters. Do you seriously think you can take responsibility for her life? After 30 years together, I guess I did have some affection for him. That's why I said it as a warning. But Hector didn't think at all and started complaining to me. Are you kidding me? I'm the president of the company. As long as I'm here, Stella won't be threatened, and I can provide for her. You, a non-productive housewife, should worry about being divorced and left by your husband." His usual attitude finally made me feel that my love for Hector had completely dried up, and my heart, now empty, filled with hatred. "Yeah, sure. If you say so, I won't stop you. But just don't regret it," I said as a final warning, but it didn't seem to resonate with Hector. "Regret? I won't. Unlike you, a housewife with no real career, I've been winning from the start. Now go on, live as a lonely woman divorced at 56. Thus, a period was put on our 30 years of marriage. Men have no prohibition period for remarriage, so once divorced, they can marry someone else immediately." Hector, having received the divorce papers I signed, submitted them along with Stella's marriage registration, probably confusing the City Hall staff. But that aside, it seemed divorcing me and marrying Stella was a foregone conclusion, and they soon flew abroad. Their purpose was a wedding ceremony. Perhaps they couldn't invite employees to a wedding stemming from an affair, but they still had a grand ceremony with a small number of guests. I wonder how much they spent. After their wedding overseas, they enjoyed their honeymoon and returned home after about 2 weeks. After the divorce, Hector moved out, perhaps buying a condominium somewhere, and now lives there with Stella. However, when he returned for something he forgot, I greeted him with a thin smile and said, "Did you check your credit card statement properly?" Startled by my sudden question, he looked visibly uncomfortable, but his expression fell with my next words. I kept quiet. "But that girl, what? Seems she's hooked on a guy from the nightclub." "Huh? Wait, what are you talking about all of a sudden? Nightclub? That can't be. She's a pure maiden." Seeing him say such things gave me chills. However, the fact that Stella was into nightclubbing remained unchanged, no matter what anyone said. As he looked incredulous, I placed a photo in front of him. And just like that, he let out a silent scream. Thought cheating and divorcing was the end? Thought a housewife like me wouldn't know anything, so wouldn't claim compensation in a divorce court? Haha, how funny. Unfortunately, I had been preparing all along to get back at you both, with enough care to have such photos ready. Hector, with trembling hands, somehow lifted the photo and scrutinized it. This blonde guy is from the nightclub? Yes, that's right. It's from one of the highest-rated places in the urban hub, apparently. Stella has the means to treat these men? Based on the empty bottles nearby, I'd estimate she's spent well over $10K. $10K. There's no way she has that kind of spare cash. Repeating my words, Hector buried his face in his hands. Then, as if coming to his senses, he started checking his credit card statement on his smartphone. His face grew increasingly pale. As I thought, Stella had been using Hector's credit card to lavish money on men. For her, it was a way to get pampered by men without spending her own money. There couldn't be a more convenient idiom than that. Yes, he was completely duped by her. Realizing this, he looked up at me and asked, "Can I claim this as unauthorized use with the credit card company?" There's no way. She's not a minor, but a full-grown 23-year-old. Plus, she's your spouse. It's not like she stole the card. You gave her the freedom to use it, right? As I said this, Hector continued with an agonized expression. I gave it to her for household expenses, thinking she'd use a few $1,000s at most, maybe up to $100K. But to spend it on men. That's inconceivable. What's going on? He was lamenting, but it was his own fault. He failed to see her true nature and gave her a credit card with a limit that exceeded $10K. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of the situation. Hours later, I received a call from Stella. "Hey, were you secretly digging into my affairs?" I got back, and Hector showed me the photo and accused me. Unbelievable. Seriously, stop it with your ugly, old jealousy. The photo I showed him earlier was brought back by him and used to confront her. Seems like she got a good scolding, revealing a side of her that's far from the usual charming facade. I almost burst into laughter. Hector was one thing, but she was another story. Being cheated on and having my husband stolen justifies this, doesn't it? The affair is a fact, but without objective evidence, you might have denied it. So, I asked a detective to provide indisputable evidence of the affair, whether it's photos or audio. I responded calmly. She seemed to be grinding her teeth on the other end of the line. After a few seconds of silence, she huffed and said, "Then fine. This is defamation, so I'm going to sue you." Huh? I let out an incredulous laugh. Did she really understand the meaning of defamation when she said that? In this case, Stella and Hector, who ended a 30-year marriage due to an affair, are on the offending side. If anyone were to sue, it would be me, the victim. I was astounded by Stella's misunderstanding. But her misconceptions didn't stop. I have Hector, the ultimate ATM. A little cry, and he's immediately back on my side. And you're nothing. Just wait until the day you're the one crying. With that, she hung up abruptly. Naturally, Stella ended up being the one to suffer later on. A few days after I exposed Stella's true nature to Hector, Stella came to me begging for forgiveness. About the compensation in the divorce. If I'm sued, I'll pay, so could you tell Hector? Suing a 23-year-old for marital fraud seems a bit much. The turn of events was as I expected, and I couldn't help but laugh. Stella frowned for a moment, but, realizing her current predicament, could only glare at me resentfully. "Hector, being a company president, had connections with lawyers. That's probably why you asked. So he inquired whether he could sue her for marital fraud. Stella had clearly stated she viewed him as an ATM, showing no love. And regarding the pregnancy, if it turned out not to be his child, the outcome was clear. Despite her bravado, when faced with the possibility of being sued, she was powerless. That's why she came to me for help. Ironically, I was the only one who could stop Hector in this situation. Unfortunately, I am human too, and I have feelings about the way you two treated me. Paying money isn't going to settle everything, you know? You knew he was married and yet engaged in an affair, and even got pregnant. Can you understand the mental anguish I experienced when I found out? Without a single laugh and speaking rapidly, I told Stella, who seemed to shrink away in fear. She had no words to return. Let me be clear. I have no intention of forgiving Stella or Hector. I thought it was about time to settle this. I had been somewhat considerate because Stella was pregnant, but it seems that's no longer necessary. I had made up my mind. Let's handle the future through lawyers, shall we? I don't plan to drag this on forever. Be prepared. With a glare, Stella let out a small scream and ran away. If her feelings were so weak that she'd flee from harsh words, she shouldn't have started this in the first place. But once something has happened, there's no undoing it. A few days later, Hector came to my house. He had a smile plastered on his face, as if it were glued on, pleading for a reconstruction of our relationship. The audacity was astounding. Thinking so, I quickly dispelled his hopes. Now you want to start over? What kind of nerve do you have? Besides, I told you, didn't I? Can you take responsibility for her life after getting your 23-year-old girlfriend pregnant? I never imagined she would be such a deceitful woman. Using my credit card to lavish gifts on men, buying luxury goods at will. Because of her, I lost about $50K from my savings. That was good information. I smirked and said, "That's our joint savings, right? I'll remind you, we need to split the amount from the time we divorced. I believe we had about $200K saved up as a married couple, right? I'll be taking $100K as my share of the marital assets. Unfortunately, since Stella spent your share, all that's left for you is $50K. At that, Hector began to get angry. He argued that the money Stella spent was an ineffective force, so we should divide the assets at $150K. His self-centered argument finally brought me to my limit of patience. If he was the one cheated on, maybe he could make such a claim. But since his affair partner wasted the marital savings on other men, he had no right to say anything. And he was forgetting one more crucial thing, which I decided to remind him of. I checked with the lawyer, and dividing the $200K at the time of our divorce for the property division is a done deal. Plus, Hector, you should be prepared. You're getting removed from the company's top position. What? No. Divorce and the company have nothing to do with each other. The company is mine. I built it. The property division shouldn't. He was cut off when the living room door opened, and the person standing there made Hector freeze. It was Jeffrey. Dad, I'm disappointed. To think you'd rather not pay off your mistress Splurgis with your own savings, so you'd dip into the company's funds. At that moment, his demeanor completely changed. Until then, he might have appeared somewhat confident, perhaps thinking he could talk his way out of it with me. But with Jeffrey's arrival and his statement, Hector found himself in a tight spot. Now, as he pointed out, Hector had been tampering with the company's funds. It's not a cute amount, like a few $1K. Not just a few $1,000s, but over $100K had been embezzled. Dad, you know I'd been studying economics and business at university while working in accounting at your company, right? When I noticed something was off and conducted an internal investigation, it turned out Dad was embezzling company money, he stated, presenting irrefutable evidence. Realizing escape was futile, Hector, like Stella before him, pleaded repeatedly for forgiveness. I was wrong. I admit it. So, Jeffrey, can't you overlook it? I'm your dad. Gloria, we were married for 30 years. Be a bit kinder to me. Please, such a shallow apology was unnecessary. Neither mine nor Jeffrey's feelings had changed at all. The executives had already agreed that someone like him could not be entrusted with the company. By the time Hector realized it, it was too late, and all he could do was cry and apologize. Then, someone barged in. It was obvious who it was, Stella. So you were here. Since the man thing came out, you haven't come home, and you've been avoiding me at work. Fine. I'm divorcing Hector. The child is definitely yours, so you'll be paying alimony and compensation in the divorce. Facing her red-faced anger, it wasn't me or Hector who responded, but Jeffrey. Stella, do you understand why I became Mom and Dad's adopted son? Huh? Because this old lady is infertile. Mom is not infertile. The one who is infertile is Dad. At that moment, the atmosphere froze. After starting infertility treatments, we couldn't get cooperation from him. He might be infertile. But without his cooperation for the tests, there was nothing we could do. I had given up then, but now I couldn't shake off my suspicion. Stella was 23, and I was in my early 30s when we started the treatments. Though there's a difference, fertility rates don't change much until about 35. So when I learned Stella was pregnant, I decided to visit someone. That someone was the gynecologist Hector had initially recommended. I was really conflicted about going, but I thought maybe they knew something and sought help. That's when I found out the shocking truth. I wasn't infertile, but Hector was. Apparently, he has no ability to impregnate anyone. Before dating me, his ex-girlfriend told him to get tested reluctantly. Knowing his pride and their acquaintance, the doctor didn't tell the truth and said there were no issues. When visiting the doctor, a friend worried about me insisted on coming along, but I never imagined finding out such a fact. As a doctor, not disclosing the actual test results wasn't right, but blaming him now doesn't change anything. The fact remains, you are infertile. So Stella, how exactly did you conceive his child? Stella started to falter. If she truly believed Hector was the father, she could have outright denied my claims. Her inability to do so probably meant something. Hector, more upset by Stella piling on lies than the revelation of his infertility, began to berate her fiercely. Seeing them about to start an ugly argument, I intervened. Stella initially approached you to use you. That's an undeniable fact. I understand your anger, but you cheated on me first. That's also a fact. Before you two start a nasty fight, isn't there something you should say to me? With a glare, Hector shut his mouth. Then Stella said, I'm sorry. I never thought it would come to this. Oh, so you destroyed a family with that mindset? She could only cry and keep apologizing. I couldn't bear to watch. Exchanging a nod with Jeffrey, I presented them with the documents for the compensation claim in the divorce court. Seeing it, Hector's voice cracked. "Hey, what's with this amount? It's ridiculous. Divorce settlements for cheating are supposed to be around $30K at most, right? What is this amount?" The amount I demanded was $100K. It's understandable to be shocked by the high figure, but there's a valid reason for it. For the past 10 years, Hector, despite being in a superior position as the company's president, had not given me, a housewife, any living expenses. I managed because I had about $100K inherited from my parents. I used it for living expenses and Jeffrey's education. So frankly, my personal savings were zero. Inheritance isn't subject to division, yet I had to use it because Hector didn't provide living expenses. It was a force majeure. And the final straw was the affair. The higher the social status of the party involved, the higher the compensation in a divorce court due to responsibility, as explained by the lawyer. I went through all past cases, searching for someone in a similar situation as me. I found cases where individuals won over $100K in the past. The amount my lawyer and I proposed wasn't just arbitrarily high. It was calculated based on Hector's conduct over the past 10 years, his position as a president, his ability to pay, and his behavior after the affair was revealed. In other words, it was justified. If they had complaints, they were prepared to make them pay this amount, even if it meant going to court. Not providing living expenses to your housewife and making me pay for that and the education fees from my inherited money, knowing well enough that you weren't giving any. No remorse from you. And Stella even threatened to sue for defamation. You two fulfill the conditions for a high compensation in divorce court. Then Stella desperately clung to a pathetic plea. "Please wait. I'm reflecting now." So what? Expecting leniency or a reduction? Such a change of heart. I was beyond angry. I was astounded. With a heavy sigh, I glared at her and said, "Now you're desperate and want forgiveness? A reduction? Or perhaps to be overlooked?" Such naive thoughts won't work. Eventually, Stella became speechless, just biting her lip and looking at me. Turning to Hector, he let out a small shriek. Then he started saying the unimaginable. I was, like Gloria, deceived by her. Yes, I'm a victim too. So, let's fight this together. Huh? The thought of abandoning her to lighten his financial burden in the divorce settlement. He must be aiming for that by reconciling with me. To think such a shallow man was my husband embarrassed me. Both of you are pathetic. If you cheat, take responsibility till the end. That's what adults do. You're not children who've just learned to talk. Jeffrey joined in the argument. This is the worst. I no longer see you as my dad. My only parent is Mom. Stella, if you're here just to cheat, you might as well leave. Said and done. The two were unable to retort and just collapsed on the spot. After involving our lawyers in discussions, we settled on $70K. Initially, my lawyer had said that getting $40K to $50K would be good, but I couldn't forgive his actions, so I insisted on $100K. Even if reduced, I was confident of securing about $50K. The final conclusion was that Hector's affair, without providing living expenses or paying for our child's education, was egregious, and this was determined in court. As a result, Hector and Stella were ordered to pay $70K. Hector was arrested for embezzling company funds, receiving a suspended sentence. With a suspended sentence, he avoided prison, but fell into a debt hell, hitting rock bottom. Of course, he ended with Stella. She tried to find the father among dozens of candidates, but eventually gave up. The child was placed in a facility, arguably better off than being raised by her. Stella resigned, and, after being employed elsewhere for a low wage, also took up night jobs to continue paying the divorce compensation to me. Hector was ousted from the company, unable to find employment due to spreading rumors, now juggling part-time jobs. They had to let go of the condominium they lived in and now likely reside in an old, drafty apartment. The executive director took over as the new president, with plans to pass it on to Jeffrey when ready. The company took a significant hit, but is now moving forward united. I got money and the house in the property division, but sold the house to live in a smaller apartment, finding it more peaceful. This is somehow more calming. Jeffrey graduated from university successfully and is respected in the company. After a tumultuous decade and divorce process, I now look forward to a peaceful retirement, enjoying the straight and honest young man he has become, unlike his irresponsible father.
I can't take it anymore. Please, just let me quit. I confessed, feeling utterly cornered and desperate to express my emotions. The humiliating words that had been hurled at me kept echoing in my mind. Losers should just cry in the corner. A loser. Maybe that's exactly what I am. I'm completely useless. Even if I tried to raise my voice in protest, I knew that neither Luke nor Carrie would change their minds. Well then, I suppose I can allow you to stay at the company. It is a favor for Luke, after all, Carrie said condescendingly. Sorry, that's about all I can do for you. It doesn't seem like you and I can climb the corporate ladder together, Emma, Luke added, his words crushing me. Realizing that I had unknowingly relied too much on Luke, their joint declaration left me stunned and speechless. However, even in my current state, there were still people who saw my worth and appreciated me for who I am. Why don't you try applying to another company? What? I responded, taken aback by the idea. But they were right. I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity forever. Carrie, who had always looked down on me as inferior. Luke, who believed that I couldn't succeed alongside him. I had to prove them both wrong. I refused to let things end this way. My name is Emma Brown, a 28-year-old ordinary company employee. When I first joined the company, I had originally hoped for a desk job. However, due to the company's needs, I was hired into the sales department instead. As someone who had always struggled with interpersonal interactions, working in sales was a constant challenge for me. Even now, just thinking about it makes me want to cry. You're so slow. Could you please stop dragging us down? Carrie Smith, my colleague who had joined the company at the same time, would often complain about me. Being the daughter of the executive director, her words carried a lot of weight in various ways. As a result, there were times when I found myself pushed to my limits, both mentally and physically. Nevertheless, I desperately tried my best to avoid getting fired. In the current economic downturn, I knew that once I lost my job, there was no guarantee of finding another one. Perhaps it was because I was always so occupied and had no room to breathe, but to be honest, I had no luck with romance until a few years ago. However, a change was about to come into my life. Emma, would you please go out with me? The man who confessed to me was named Luke Williams, a college at the company where I worked. After joining the company, I often found myself watching over his work as his senior. To be honest, he seemed quite reckless at first. Unlike me, who was inexperienced and afraid of sales, he boldly tried to deepen relationships with clients. Sometimes his approach would succeed, while other times it would only serve to make the other party uncomfortable. Together, we accumulated experience working on various cases, leading us to where we are today. Initially, we had a senior-junior dynamic, but before we knew it, we had become colleagues who supported each other at work. By the time I realized it, he had become one of the top performers in our department, and we had developed a relationship where we could complement each other's weaknesses. I suppose he must have strongly felt the same way, which is why he decided to confess to me. "I thought that if it's with you, Emma, we could continue to help each other and climb the corporate ladder together," he said, echoing my own feelings. Hearing those words that perfectly captured what I had been sensing, I accepted his confession. And so, our relationship began and progressed smoothly. Although we had some minor differences in values, we never had any major fights, and I believe we were able to nurture feelings of mutual affection. For someone like me who tends to be a bit hesitant, having Luke by my side to guide me was reassuring. Luke is a person with strong ambitions and no intention of staying in his current position. That's why the marriage proposal also came from Luke. "Emma, I want you to spend the rest of your life with me," he declared firmly and powerfully, which made me incredibly happy. Of course, I gladly accepted, but all I could do was nod with tears in my eyes. Even now, remembering that moment makes me embarrassed. And so, we decided to get married and started making preparations, taking our time. I believed that we would get married without any issues and live happily ever after. However, things didn't turn out that way. It happened one day, about a month before our wedding. "Wow, we finished early today," I mused as the day's sales ended much earlier than scheduled. The biggest reason was that one of our clients had postponed their appointment, but everything else had also gone smoothly without any particular problems. When I checked with my boss about what I should do, "You can go straight home, it's fine. You've been busy lately, haven't you?" he replied. Our manager, Jimmy Johnson, is an amazing person. Not only is he great at his job, but he also takes the time to look out for each and every one of us individually. If I remember correctly, he's only about 3 years older than me. Yet, his abilities as a working professional are so far beyond mine that I have always looked up to him. It's just like you, Emma, to try and get as much work done as possible before your wedding. Once I get married and my life changes, I might not be able to work the same way I have been. That's why I wanted to finish up any work that I could while I still had the chance. And Jimmy, being the understanding partner he is, fully grasped how I felt about our relationship. "Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your kindness. Take this time to relax and rest up," he advised before I ended the call. I expressed my heartfelt gratitude to Jimmy. I've been in Jimmy's care ever since I joined the company. He has been to me what I am to Luke. I even secretly admired him at one point. However, the position of a manager seemed incredibly distant and out of reach for me. As I kept thinking that he was too good for me, my feelings naturally settled down over time. It's funny how I ended up getting engaged to Luke, who is in a sense the opposite position of where I am. Life works in mysterious ways. Thinking about that, I suddenly remembered something. If I recall correctly, Luke had taken a paid vacation day today. Apparently, he had accumulated quite a few and needed to use them up. I had planned to go see him in the evening, but moving up the time might not be a bad idea. Lately, I had been feeling like Luke was a bit down. It might be what they call pre-wedding jitters. Even men can experience it due to financial anxieties about life after marriage or fatigue from all the wedding preparations. If that's the case, I wanted to cheer him up and help him feel a little better. If he wanted to enjoy some alone time, I could always head back home right away. With that in mind, I decided to give Luke a call. However, there was no response. It seemed like his phone was turned off. I wonder if he's okay, I thought to myself, feeling a hint of concern. Growing increasingly anxious, I made my way to Luke's apartment building. I'll just check on him briefly and figure out what to do next, I thought to myself as my pace quickened without me realizing it. Perhaps that's why I arrived at Luke's apartment and his door much sooner than I had anticipated. "Luke, are you there?" I called out while unlocking the door with the spare key he had given me. "Emma? Just wait a minute." It seemed like Luke was indeed at home. While feeling a sense of relief, I also noticed something odd. It wasn't just that Luke's voice sounded flustered upon realizing I had come over. There was something else that bothered me even more: the shoes placed at the entrance. In addition to Luke's familiar shoes, there was a pair of women's shoes. I had a feeling I recognized those shoes from somewhere. As that sense of déjà vu turned into a growing unease, I couldn't control my emotions. Ignoring Luke's attempts to stop me, I made my way inside his apartment. Why? The scene that unfolded before me was beyond belief. He was standing up from the couch, perhaps trying to stop me from entering. And there was Carrie Smith, clinging onto him as if to hold him back. Both of them were halfway undressed. In that situation, rather than sensing any rejection from Luke towards Carrie's embrace, I strongly felt his urgency to do something about me first. Seeing Luke's expression, I instinctively knew that what was happening here wasn't just two coworkers from the same company meeting up. It was a secret rendezvous between Luke and Carrie as a couple. Why? Why is this happening? I stammered in disbelief. "Well, it's..." Luke mumbled, looking somewhat guilty. "It's not his fault at all. It's yours," she declared without a shred of remorse. Stunned by her audacity, I stood there in shock as she continued boldly. "You're getting married next month, and yet you can't even keep one man to yourself. How undesirable can you be?" She smirked at me condescendingly. What was so funny about this situation? Wasn't it far more absurd for someone to try and steal another person's fiancé right before their wedding? Losing all reason, I took a step towards her without thinking deeply about my actions. Did I want to grab her by the collar? Or did I want to do something else entirely? I wasn't sure myself. However, I was stopped from doing anything by none other than Luke himself. Instead of siding with me, his fiancée, Luke chose to protect her. At that moment, I fully understood that his heart was no longer with me, but with Carrie. "This is awful, just awful," I cried out. Confronted with the undeniable proof of their relationship, all I could do was turn my back and run away. I heard someone's voice calling out from behind me, but I was in no state of mind to listen to it till the end. I let my emotions guide my feet, and before I knew it, I had returned to my own home. I was so distraught that I couldn't even remember how I got back. At some point, my surroundings had turned pitch black. The screen of my discarded smartphone lit up every time a call or message came in. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I spent the entire night like that. What should I do about work? I wondered as I realized it was early morning. I knew I wasn't in any mental state to go to the office. Even if I did go, I would only cause worry and inconvenience for those around me. The right thing to do would be to confront Luke and Carrie and uncover the whole truth. But I was too scared to do even that. I feared that everything I had built up until now would crumble apart. And so, I contacted my manager and informed him that I would be taking the day off. The rest of the day passed by with me doing almost nothing at all. The following morning, I had somehow managed to regain enough composure to face the day. However, I still couldn't bring myself to check the messages that were undoubtedly from Luke on my smartphone. I honestly had no idea what would happen when I saw him at the office. But I couldn't cause any more trouble for the company. With that thought in mind, I dragged myself to work. However, what awaited me there was a situation I could never have anticipated. "Good morning, everyone. I apologize for my absence yesterday." I greeted my colleagues as I entered my workspace. But instead of returning my greeting, they all gave me indescribable looks and whispered among themselves. "Well," I trailed off awkwardly. "No one here wants to talk to you. Can't you read the room?" The only person who spoke to me was Carrie, the last person I wanted to exchange words with right now. I turned to face her, desperately trying to control my trembling body. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "You've been acting all high and mighty as a senior for so long, restraining a capable employee like Luke. You're just a piece of trash, aren't you?" Carrie accused me harshly. "I'm trash? And Luke?" From her perspective, it probably wasn't strange to call Luke by his first name so casually. However, everyone here knew about our engagement. In fact, they were even invited to our wedding. Naturally, her words shouldn't have been accepted so easily. That's what I thought, but no one around us objected to her statement. "Luke, why aren't you saying anything?" I called out to Luke, who had already arrived at work and was sitting in front of his desk. It was probably true that he had cheated on me with Carrie. Even so, I wanted him to at least not deny everything we had been through together. But Luke remained seated, looking distressed and unwilling to speak up. As if to add insult to injury, Carrie continued her verbal assault. "You've always been forcing him to do all sorts of things, haven't you? You're truly the worst." She laughed gleefully, taking obvious pleasure in my misery. Even if I were the trash she claimed me to be, if she truly cared about Luke, she wouldn't be making such an expression. She should be burning with anger towards me for restraining him. But that wasn't the case. It was clear that she was going out of her way to demean me unnecessarily. Probably to bring me down and claim Luke for herself. I didn't think everyone's silence meant they simply believed her words. As the daughter of the executive director, Carrie had always used her father's influence to do as she pleased. She would push unwanted tasks onto others and take credit for their achievements. Until Jimmy Johnson became the manager and started keeping a close eye on her, there were hardly any people who could stand up to her. Although her blatant tyranny had diminished recently, her influence hadn't disappeared completely. That's why everyone was too afraid to oppose her and remained silent. I believed that was also a significant factor in their behavior. I didn't want anyone else to suffer because of me. So, I had no choice but to do my work without arguing back. "I knew I'd find you here, Emma." During lunchtime, I had escaped from the uncomfortable atmosphere and was on the rooftop of the office building when Luke approached me. He was the only one who knew that I would come here to look at the town and sky whenever I felt down, so it wasn't surprising that he found me. The problem was that once again, Carrie was standing right beside him. She had shamelessly intruded on a secret that belonged only to Luke and me. And Luke said nothing about it. Amid the surging desire to scream inside, Carrie declared, "What's with that tragic heroine face? Isn't it all your own fault?" "My fault?" I muttered in disbelief, taken aback by her unexpected words. "You've always acted so serious and hardworking since way back. Because you, my colleague, were like that, I had no choice but to feel pressured not to slack off," she ranted, her voice dripping with venom. "What?" I could barely process her accusations, my mind reeling from the shock. I could barely process her accusations, my mind reeling from the shock. "So even though I harassed you constantly, you, the shameless and brazen one, never quit." It was truly appalling, she continued, her words cutting deep into my heart. I had always thought her behavior was just complaining. To think it was actually harassment all along. If I'm being honest, I had considered that possibility, but hearing it directly from her mouth was a devastating blow. "That's..." I trailed off, at a loss for words. To top it all off, she had snatched Luke, the man I had my sights on, right from under my nose and gotten engaged to him. As I stood there, unable to respond to her string of self-centered remarks, she made no effort to hide the ugly distortion of her face. "I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided to put you, the eyesore, in your place." Occasionally laughing through her nose, she continued to expose her ill intentions. "I actually wanted to break you two up right before the wedding, but, well, I suppose it's good that I saved myself the trouble." That's just..." I stammered, struggling to form a coherent response. let me make this clear, he is on my side," she declared triumphantly, her eyes gleaming with a wicked satisfaction. Even though my mind had already grasped the nature of Luke and Carrie's relationship, I found myself desperately turning my gaze towards Luke, clinging to some faint hope. However, that hope was swiftly betrayed by none other than Luke himself. "I'm sorry, Emma. I want to climb the corporate ladder faster," he admitted, his words a dagger to my heart. With his confession, I understood. Luke had prioritized his own desires and ambitions over me. And my suspicion was correct. "If I date Carrie, I can get promoted. That's what it comes down to," Luke confirmed, acknowledging that he had taken Carrie's bait when she dangled her influence as the executive director's daughter in front of him. She had promised to ask her father for his promotion if he chose her over me. "You're not a good match for him. I, who was always meant to be at the top and pull him up, am the one who's truly suited for him," Carrie declared, her words dripping with condescension. Perhaps she was right. I had simply been dragged along by him, relying on his existence and taking it for granted. Maybe I hadn't genuinely tried to understand how he felt about that. "So, with that being said, losers should just cry in the corner," Carrie sneered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "A loser. Maybe that's exactly what I am. I'm completely useless. Even if I desperately raised my voice here, neither Luke nor Carrie would change their minds." "In that case, I suppose I can allow you to stay at the company. It is a favor for Luke, after all," she conceded, her tone laced with mock generosity. "Sorry, that's about all I can do for you. It doesn't seem like you and I can climb the corporate ladder together, Emma," Luke added, driving the final nail into the coffin of our relationship. I had unknowingly relied too much on him. Stunned by their joint declaration, I stood there in a daze, unable to move or think clearly. I didn't even notice when they left, too shocked to muster any semblance of a rebuttal. From that point on, I was treated like a pariah within the company for a while. Although Luke paid for the wedding cancellation fees, it seemed trivial compared to the situation I found myself in. It appeared that if you repeated lies and nonsense often enough, they would eventually be accepted as truth. Carrie's words had spread to other departments and were being taken as fact. As a result, the gazes directed at me from those around me grew cold, and I had no choice but to shrink into myself. Was crying in the corner all I could do, just as she had said? As I pondered this, lost in thought, I found myself on the rooftop once again, watching the sunset. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Are you okay, Emma?" I wondered how long he had been there without me noticing. Jimmy asked, standing a short distance away from me. "Jimmy." My voice, barely managing to respond, sounded far more exhausted than I had realized. Witnessing my words and demeanor, Jimmy lowered his head slightly. "You're not okay, are you?" "I'm sorry." He apologized, his tone sincere and understanding. Jimmy's voice hadn't changed at all from before, even now when the attitudes of those around me had completely shifted. There was a strange sense of reassurance in that consistency. Perhaps it was because of that, but suddenly, an unidentifiable emotion welled up inside me. Before I knew it, I found myself speaking my mind while tears streamed down my face. "I can't take it anymore. Please, just let me quit," I pleaded, my voice breaking with desperation. I had thought I could endure it. I had wanted to keep trying. But I had reached my limit. I couldn't stay here any longer. In response to my heartfelt words, Jimmy replied in a gentle voice, "If that's what you want, Emma, I have no right to say otherwise. But before that, I'd like to make one suggestion, if you'll allow me." "What is it?" I asked, curiosity piqued despite my emotional state. "Why don't you try applying to another company?" he proposed, his words catching me off guard. "What?" I blurted out, my eyes widening in surprise at the sudden suggestion. With his expression and voice remaining calm, Jimmy continued, "Actually, I've been approached about it for a while now." According to Jimmy, our parent company was apparently launching a new business venture. They were searching for talented individuals from each of their group companies to join the new department. Jimmy was one of those chosen, and he had been granted permission to select someone he thought was a perfect fit to transfer with him. "If I had to choose someone, Emma, it would be you. There's no one else. That's what I believe," he stated, his words filled with conviction. "Why me?" I asked, confusion evident in my voice. If anyone was considered a promising candidate in our company, it would be Luke. That's what I thought as I posed the question. "Starting something new requires a lot of new methodologies. But that alone isn't enough," Jimmy replied, catching me off guard with his unexpected response. "To accomplish something extraordinary, a solid foundation is also important, don't you think?" He continued, his words resonating with me. I nodded in agreement, acknowledging the truth in his statement. Seeing my reaction, Jimmy nodded back with a satisfied expression before continuing. "In that regard, with your diligence and perseverance, I believe you can build that foundation." "That's what I think," he asserted, his confidence in me unwavering. "Do you really think so?" I asked, doubt creeping into my voice. "Absolutely," Jimmy affirmed, nodding firmly. But I couldn't bring myself to believe it so easily. "I don't think I can," I admitted, my insecurities laid bare. "But I believe you can," Jimmy countered, his faith in me unwavering. I wondered what basis Jimmy had for his belief. Driven by anxiety and skepticism, I asked once more, "Why do you believe in me?" "Because even when you're not in your desired department, you don't let it get to you. You face your work head-on with dedication and sincerity," he explained, his eyes reflecting nothing but honesty. At first, I thought he might be saying this out of consideration for my situation, but that wasn't the case. While that might be a factor, it didn't seem to be his primary reason. My manager was genuinely appreciating my abilities and inviting me based on that. Realizing this, I found myself trembling with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. "Emma, I'm sorry," Jimmy said, bowing his head deeply in apology. "What? What's gotten into you all of a sudden?" I asked, taken aback by his unexpected gesture. "I've been making various arrangements to facilitate your transfer, and because of that, I wasn't able to properly help you out," he explained, his voice tinged with regret. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen much of Jimmy since the day I returned to work after learning about Luke's infidelity. Looking back on it now, he was probably busy identifying the next candidate for the manager position. To be honest, I had wondered why he wasn't there for me during such a difficult time. But seeing him express remorse now, any trivial grudges I held seemed to vanish into thin air. Instead, I felt ashamed of myself for harboring resentment towards him. "It's all right, Jimmy. Please don't worry about it," I reassured him, my voice sincere and forgiving. "I'm grateful to hear you say that." "So, what do you think?" he asked, his eyes searching mine for an answer. As we exchanged those words, I felt the dark, heavy feelings within me rapidly dissipating along with my grudges. Even in my current state, there were still people who saw my worth and appreciated me. If that was the case, I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity any longer. "I understand," I said, taking a deep breath and straightening my posture. "If you're willing to have me, despite my shortcomings, then I would be honored to accept your offer," I declared, turning to face Jimmy and bowing deeply, pouring all of my gratitude into the gesture. "Despite your shortcomings?" "Nonsense," he exclaimed, a delighted smile spreading across his face in response to my answer. "As I said before, it has to be you," he reiterated, his conviction unwavering. "It has to be me," I repeated, a hint of disbelief in my voice. "Yes. That's why you need to have more confidence in yourself. You're far more amazing than you give yourself credit for," Jimmy asserted, his words striking a chord deep within me. His encouragement stirred something in the depths of my heart, urging me to break free from my current state. Carrie, who had looked down on me as inferior. Luke, who believed that I couldn't succeed alongside him. I had to prove them both wrong. I refused to let things end this way. Thanks to Jimmy, the smoldering embers within me were now burning brightly, ready to ignite into a roaring flame. Riding on the momentum of those feelings, I found myself heading to a particular place after work. A place I had actively avoided until now. But I wouldn't run away anymore. With that resolve in my heart, I moved forward.
Emma? What brings you here?
It was Luke's apartment. He was surprised by my unexpected visit. Come to think of it, I had forgotten to inform him beforehand. Of course, that wasn't the only reason for his surprise. After being so harshly rejected, the fact that I had gone out of my way to see him again was likely enough to catch him off guard.
I'm sorry. I should have contacted you in advance.
I apologized, my voice steady and composed. That's not a problem, but... Luke's voice still trembled slightly. It was only natural, considering I hadn't completely moved on in the truest sense.
Well, if it isn't the loser.
Carrie emerged from the depths of the apartment, her voice dripping with disdain.
What business could you possibly have here? Did you come to apologize for causing trouble?
She taunted, her words brimming with confidence and a clear provocation. She taunted, her words brimming with confidence and a clear provocation. Her words served as a stark reminder of the fact that she had stolen Luke away from me. As I witnessed the painful reality before me, I felt the urge to turn away and escape from it all. The desire to run away threatened to overwhelm me. But I knew I had to change, starting from this moment. I couldn't let the opportunity Jimmy had given me go to waste. With renewed determination etched into my heart, I lifted my face, which had been on the verge of drooping, and declared, I came to collect my belongings that I left here. They'll only get in your way if I leave them, right? I see. He responded, a hint of guilt flickering across his face.
That saves me the trouble. I was planning on throwing everything out as trash anyway.
Carrie chimed in, laughing condescendingly at me. Her words stung, and it wasn't as if I didn't feel angry. But I had to overcome this hurdle if I wanted to start anew. I needed to become a version of myself that could prove these two wrong. So, instead of letting their taunts get to me, I put on a smile and told them, That's actually perfect timing.
What?
Carrie's eyes widened in surprise, clearly caught off guard by my unexpected reaction. Luke, too, looked slightly taken aback. I'll tidy up my things so they don't end up as garbage. Do you mind if I come inside for a bit? I asked, my voice steady and composed. Okay, sure, but... Luke hesitated, his confusion evident. Luke hesitated, his confusion evident.
What a boring response.
Carrie scoffed, rolling her eyes. Perhaps she had expected me to burst into tears and run away again. If that was the case, then I had managed to deliver a small, yet satisfying counterattack. Sorry for being so boring. I apologized, my tone laced with a hint of sarcasm. With a slightly elevated mood, I stepped into the apartment. Unsurprisingly, the room itself hadn't undergone any significant changes. The only noticeable difference was the presence of a few unfamiliar items, likely belonging to Carrie. Just a short while ago, being here had felt so natural. I had been looking forward to my future and marriage with Luke. How had things turned out this way? A small part of me still harbored those thoughts deep within. But that was all in the past now. If I were being honest, I hadn't fully come to terms with it yet. However, to ensure that I could move on someday, I deliberately chose to define it as a part of my past. With that mindset, I began to gather my belongings scattered throughout the room. My favorite mug, cushions, and the photos commemorating our relationship. As I collected these items, I also picked up the various memories associated with them. It was unlikely that they would ever be used or displayed again. I wasn't sure if I would be able to throw them away. Perhaps I would end up stuffing them all into a cardboard box and sealing them away. In hindsight, it might have been less troublesome to let them dispose of everything. Nevertheless, this was something I needed to do. To draw a line under my memories with him, using my own hands. And to declare war on Carrie and Luke. "Well then, sorry for the disturbance," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. I had procured a reasonably sized cardboard box from a supermarket along the way. The memories of Luke and I fit neatly inside, taking up only a portion of the space. I had worried that they might not even fit into a single box, so the realization left me feeling a bit deflated.
"You were such an eyesore. Don't ever come back here again,"
Carrie spat, her condescending gaze unchanged. But I had no intention of losing to her anymore. Meeting her gaze directly, I declared, "Don't worry. I won't ever come back."
"Keep putting on a brave face, if that makes you feel better,"
Carrie retorted, seemingly taken aback by my unwavering eye contact. The fact that she was getting flustered over something so trivial struck me as somewhat amusing.
"What's so funny?"
she demanded, her voice laced with irritation. "It's nothing important, don't worry about it," I replied dismissively. In reality, the things I had been so afraid of turned out to be far less significant than I had imagined. By facing them head-on, I had come to that realization. Mustering up the courage to come here had been the right decision. Luke looked as if he wanted to say something, but I turned on my heel and started walking away. Carrie seemed to be making a fuss behind me, but I no longer registered her noise. At that moment, I felt a sense of refreshing lightness, as if I could walk anywhere without a care in the world. With a renewed spirit, I embarked on my new duties in a new environment alongside Jimmy. During this transition, I made a complete shift from sales to an administrative role, which had been my original preference when I first joined the company. To be precise, it was a combination of mainly administrative work with some sales responsibilities. This decision had been Jimmy's call, and it proved to be a resounding success.
"This is something only you can do, Emma. I'm counting on you,"
he had said, placing his trust in me.
"Yes, I'll give it my best shot,"
I replied enthusiastically. Having spent years working in sales, a role I was never quite comfortable with, I had gained unique insights. As a result, I became a bridge between the sales and administrative departments, often rushing between the two as a pinch hitter when needed. The new work style that Jimmy had envisioned for me was a perfect match, both for myself and for the workplace as a whole. It streamlined the overall operation of the office, and the business took off smoothly. To be honest, I had always struggled with self-confidence. But achieving great success alongside him had erased those doubts. I was filled with nothing but gratitude. Of course, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. There were plenty of challenges and unpleasant experiences along the way. However, compared to the betrayal of my fiancé and the mistreatment from my colleagues, those hurdles seemed insignificant. Having overcome that pain, there was nothing I couldn't conquer. That confidence surged within me. As I navigated various obstacles, I gained the trust and admiration of many people who believed in me.
"You're really something, Emma. We can pretty much leave everything in your hands and know it'll be fine,"
Jimmy would often say, his voice filled with admiration. "I appreciate your trust, but Jimmy and everyone else, please make sure to do your own work properly, okay?" I would tease, a playful warning in my tone. Those were words I could never have uttered back when I lacked self-confidence. It was a joke I couldn't have made without the strength to trust others. During breaks between work, I would share laughter with him and my colleagues over such small exchanges. It was precisely because we had a relationship where we could create a warm atmosphere that we could also openly express our opinions without hesitation when the need arose. Those were fulfilling days, filled with a combination of purpose and enjoyment that I could never have imagined in my previous workplace. I was truly grateful for accepting his invitation that day. It was because I had found the courage to take that step forward that I was able to make such significant progress. As I poured my heart and soul into living each day to the fullest, time flew by in the blink of an eye, and before I knew it, 5 years had passed.
Hello everyone, it's been a while.
I greeted my former colleagues on the day I returned to the department where I had once been betrayed and mistreated. I had successfully completed all the roles I needed to fulfill at my previous assignment. But I hadn't just returned empty-handed.
Although I am still inexperienced, I will do my utmost to contribute to the department's success as the department manager,
I announced, having come back in a higher position than before. Perhaps because of that, the people who had once treated me coldly seemed somewhat awkward. However, I had no intention of holding grudges against them. I understood that given their position at the time, they didn't have much choice. But there were also some individuals who didn't fall into that category.
Don't be ridiculous.
Carrie's voice, which I hadn't heard in a long time, now only evoked a sense of nostalgia. The owner of that voice, the one who had once brought about my downfall, no longer possessed the composure she once had. Luke, standing beside her, had also lost some weight and seemed to lack his former vigor. It was understandable, considering the difficult position they found themselves in after Jimmy and I had been transferred. The person Jimmy had chosen as his successor was, much like himself, a principled individual. As a result, they were strict with Carrie and the others who tried to flaunt their status as the executive director's daughter. Apparently, she still attempted to wield her authority. But it was to no avail, as the new manager turned out to be a distant relative of the company president. Jimmy had likely chosen his successor with this in mind, anticipating such a situation. Consequently, they were no longer able to get away with the selfish behavior they had previously pushed through. The lies they told using their influence were no longer effective, and they were met with cold treatment and isolation from those who had been outraged by their actions towards me. As a result, both Luke and Carrie remained ordinary employees, far from the path of promotion. It was no wonder they were displeased by my return, having been promoted myself. I had expected them to lash out at me.
As if I would ever work under a piece of trash like you. Right, everyone?
Carrie exclaimed, making exaggerated gestures as she appealed to those around her. However, she was met with nothing but cold stares from her colleagues. Did she not realize how drastically the situation had changed from before? Even if she did, given her current circumstances, it was likely a reflection of her true feelings. She couldn't bear the thought of being subordinate to someone she had once considered beneath her. That was probably the sole reason behind her outburst. But such selfish behavior had no place in the professional world.
Your personal opinion is irrelevant,
I stated calmly.
Excuse me?
Carrie's voice rose to a shrill pitch. I responded in a matter-of-fact tone.
My appointment as department manager is based on an official order. If you cannot accept that, I suggest you resign.
My perfectly reasonable words were met with silence from Carrie, but then Luke spoke up.
Emma, let's start over.
His words were completely out of context and hardly appropriate for a workplace setting, earning him stunned and exasperated looks from those around us. Luke must have been aware of this, which could only mean that he was so desperate that he couldn't help but say it. For someone as ambitious as Luke, his current situation must have been utterly humiliating.
With you, I can.
His desperation was palpable, but it wasn't the right time or place for such a conversation. If anything, it was something he should have said long ago. I couldn't help but think that way upon hearing his words. But now, they held no meaning whatsoever. They were nothing more than a private conversation, so I cut him off mercilessly.
Excuse me, but please refrain from personal conversations. We are in the middle of a morning assembly,
I reminded him sternly. But he struggled to find the right words, desperately trying to hold on to something. To put an end to his attempts, I stated the truth.
Moreover, I am already engaged, so I cannot fulfill your expectations.
I declared, my voice unwavering.
No way!
Both Carrie and Luke were left speechless, their expressions dumbfounded. I proceeded to deliver my final demand to them in a businesslike manner.
Carrie Smith and Luke Johnson, you will receive the appropriate orders in due course. What? What do you mean? Until then, I expect you to fulfill your duties as employees in a manner that does not bring shame to the company. Now then, everyone, let's do our best today.
I concluded, my tone firm and resolute. Immediately after, the two of them seemed to cry out in protest, but their voices were drowned out by the applause that erupted as soon as I made my announcement. Witnessing this scene unfold before their eyes, they were rendered speechless, unable to do anything but stand there with stunned expressions on their faces. A few days later, it came to light that Carrie's father, the executive director, had been embezzling company funds and harassing employees for decades. He was promptly fired. At the same time, the various problematic behaviors, acts of harassment, and theft of credit that Carrie had been engaging in, simply because she was the executive director's daughter, were also exposed. Among these revelations were the preferential treatment she had given to Luke and the misuse of company funds by the two of them. As a result of these compounded offenses, both of them were naturally terminated from the company. But that's not the end of the story. It was also discovered that Luke, in his haste to climb the corporate ladder, had been using forceful tactics with clients, resulting in complaints. However, the executive director had been covering up these incidents. He probably intended it as a gift to his daughter's favorite and his future son-in-law. But the price they paid for their actions was steep. The company viewed these acts as unforgivable behaviors that damaged their social credibility and decided to sue the three individuals involved. The verdict has not been reached yet, but with ample evidence and testimonies, Carrie and the others' defeat is practically certain. In addition to paying a hefty sum in damages, the three of them will likely face significant challenges in finding new employment in the future. Perhaps it was due to the immense psychological toll they endured, but when I saw Carrie and Luke at the trial, they looked utterly worn out, a far cry from their appearance 5 years ago. I don't know what will become of them, and frankly, I no longer care. I can only hope that they will lead their lives in a way that doesn't cause trouble for anyone else. As for me, I got married before their trial even began. My husband is Jimmy. He is now the general manager at the company where I was previously assigned, having chosen to stay there. Through the ups and downs we experienced together during my time there, I remembered how I had once been attracted to him. And I realized that, unlike back then, he was no longer an unreachable presence in my life.
Will you marry me?
I mustered up the courage to propose to him. Jimmy said yes without hesitation, but then he gave me a complex expression that was a mix of embarrassment and slight dismay. I feel kind of bad about this, he admitted, his voice tinged with a hint of awkwardness.
What's wrong?
I asked, puzzled by his reaction. I feel kind of bad about this. I was planning to propose to you myself. You know, since I heard that Luke had done it before, Jimmy explained. He had wanted to overwrite the pain I had suffered in the past by proposing to me himself. But maybe this way was better for you, Emma, he added, his words filled with understanding. Knowing that Jimmy cared for me so deeply, to the point of considering my well-being above all else, I was overjoyed that our hearts were truly connected. And so, we got married. We are now living a blissful newlywed life. Honestly, the love we share is more than words can describe. Even though we work at different places now, I don't have the slightest bit of anxiety. Because he is the one who sought me out and chose me, even after witnessing me at my lowest point when my spirit was broken. I reaffirmed my determination to strive every day to be the best version of myself, worthy of such a wonderful husband. Upon arriving at the Target high-rise apartment, I approached the concierge and was handed the keys to the room. Through the elevator reserved for the higher floors, I made my way to the top floor of the apartment.
Wow, this is lovely.
As the door opened, My sister-in-law, Laura, was the first to leap in, dancing around as she exclaimed, "Let's get unpacking." I called out, but no one offered to help. Predictable, yet it still irked me. The movers placed the boxes where directed, and I was left to unpack alone.
"I'll take this spacious room. Katrina can have the tiny storeroom."
My father-in-law, Harrison, and my mother-in-law, Rosalind, went ahead and decided who was getting which room. But I ignored them and continued my work.
"This room is really nice. It would make a great final home."
Good for us. My husband, Oliver, and the in-laws said to each other, all smiles.
"It feels like a dream to live in such a house,"
Laura said with her eyes brimming with tears. It might be time to reveal the truth.
"Huh? Whose house are you talking about? Huh?"
My name is Katrina. I'm a 32-year-old freelance illustrator. I used to work for a major publishing company, but went independent and now mainly take on projects from my former employer, while also starting to work as a children's book author. I married Oliver 2 years ago, and we began living together in the apartment I've been residing in. The reason we live in my house is that it's my property, and Oliver, who was renting elsewhere, moved in with me. My parents died in a car accident when I was young. Afterwards, I was raised by my grandparents, and after graduating from college and securing a job, I bought this apartment. The payment was made using the compensation and insurance money received from my parents' accident. My grandparents raised me without touching that money and gave it to me to use for myself when I graduated college. I bought this place because my grandparents entered a nursing home. They had reserved a spot in the nursing facility, intending to move in together after raising me, not wanting me to bear the burden of their care. After much thought, I decided to buy this convenient apartment, which was also close to the nursing home my grandparents were in. My grandparents said there were other things I could spend the money on, but to me, this was the best use. I have been living here for almost 10 years now. The 10 years I spent with my parents and the 10 years I spent with my grandparents are nearly equal. I've been living in this apartment a third of my life, and I have grown quite attached to this place. I met Oliver at a friend's wedding after-party. He was a colleague of my friend's husband. We were of the same age and formed a group that started hanging out together. Over time, several couples formed from this group, and a few have married. And one of those couples was Oliver and I. Oliver was cheerful and seemed to brighten the room just by being there. From our first meeting, I was attracted to him. I admired his cheerful nature, something I lacked, and thought he was a wonderful person. However, that was only the face Oliver showed to the world, and I quickly learned about his other side after we got married. While Oliver was very gentlemanly during our courtship, he turned out to be the type who changes once the marriage is set. No, it was worse than that. After we got married, he said something unbelievable.
"Since I'm living in your house, you should take care of the living expenses."
What do you mean?
"The expenses would be the same even if I weren't here, right? So, you should continue to cover them as you have been."
I think that's how it should be. Indeed, my apartment was already paid off, with no mortgage remaining. However, there were still maintenance fees, a sinking fund for repairs, and property tax. And since we have a car, there's also the parking fee.
So, those are expenses you'd be paying even if I weren't here, right?
That's true, but
then, there should be no problem with you continuing to pay them as usual.
His argument seemed reasonable at first glance, but was fundamentally flawed.
"But Oliver, you're living here now, too. We agreed to split the living expenses. I'd really appreciate it if you could contribute."
When I said this, Oliver's eyes narrowed angrily.
"You're so money-grubbing! I never thought you were that kind of woman."
I was stunned and speechless. To me, it was obvious that as a married couple, we would share our lives equally. I had naturally assumed we would split the expenses for our home.
I'm not saying I won't contribute anything. I'll definitely pay half for my part. But you own this house, right?
So, he meant since it's my property, I should bear the costs.
I'll pay for my own necessities, isn't that fair enough?
Reluctantly, I agreed to his request. In the beginning, Oliver did pay half the living expenses as promised. But only the half that I billed him for.
This month's electricity bill came to this amount. That seems quite high. You're probably wasting money working from home?
I had quit my job while dating Oliver and started working freelance. Though I occasionally went out for meetings and networking, most of my work was done from home.
It doesn't seem fair.
First, Oliver complained about the high utility bills.
Unfair? How so? Well, I work outside almost all day. And I'm supposed to pay for your electricity use while you work from home?
What a reasoning. I was too astounded to respond.
I only use a little when I come home to sleep. So, I don't have to pay half, right?
Following this logic, Oliver began paying only a minimal amount. The same went for gas and water bills. Still, I tolerated it. Sure, Oliver was only home for a short time. And having an extra person did significantly increase the utility bills. But it was impossible to calculate exactly how much each of us used. Despite his complaints, we did share the living expenses, so I silently accepted his reasoning. Looking back, I can't believe how foolish I was, but at the time, I thought it was necessary. I decided it was better to endure and keep our marital life peaceful than to fight over something trivial from the start. Aside from money issues, Oliver was as bright and fun as before we got married. Though the financial concern always lingered in the back of my mind, I didn't struggle to live without his contributions. And I valued our happy times more. But the supposed happiness began to feel increasingly precarious.
More overtime today, they really need to get it together.
Oliver started coming home later, sounding annoyed.
Are you okay with all this overtime? There's a guideline that working over a certain number of hours a month is dangerous. You don't understand. Those are just nominal figures. A good salesman isn't just working the hours logged on the time card.
Oliver said this disdainfully.
Katrina, you've had to pull all-nighters to meet deadlines, right?
Yes, that's true.
That's my point. Don't be fooled by just the apparent numbers.
I graduated from an art college and worked as an illustrator. So I really didn't know much about sales. Faced with his assertion, I had no choice but to believe him.
I understand. But please, don't overdo it.
I know. You're kind, Katrina. I won't push myself too hard. Oliver reassured me gently, embracing my shoulder. I tried to believe in Oliver's kindness forcefully, as if believing was the only way to keep my peace of mind. Gradually, I felt increasingly betrayed by Oliver over the year. They say people can react to sudden pain, but become desensitized to slow, incremental pain. By that point, Oliver's betrayals had accumulated significantly, yet I felt I was just enduring a little longer, spending my days pretending not to notice for the sake of peace. Then, a significant event occurred.
My family's coming over soon, is that okay?
One morning, Oliver suddenly mentioned this.
Harrison and Rosalind? And Laura too?
I had visited his family's home once before we married, for a family meeting. It was a small house in the countryside. It seemed to be a fairly old house, and every part of it was old, but my parents-in-law were living there. At that time, Laura had already moved out after getting married, so I wasn't able to meet her. We did message her, but as she couldn't come due to her schedule, but gave us a message, "Welcome to the family." Since we didn't have a wedding ceremony and only took photos, that was the only time I met his parents. Of course, I never had a chance to meet Laura. Our friends held a party for us to congratulate, but I still hadn't met Oliver's relatives. As I didn't have much interaction with my own relatives, and I did not find it so strange. Now, suddenly, his parents and Laura were coming to visit. It wasn't odd for them to want to see how we were doing after a year of marriage. Without any doubt, I agreed to Oliver's words. A week later, as promised, the in-laws came to our house. "This is your place? It's not very big, is it?" That was the first thing they said as they entered our home. Of course, it's not big. This house was originally bought for me to live in alone. It has 3 rooms and a spacious living dining area. One room is almost used as a storage, and the remaining rooms served as my office and bedroom. When Oliver started living with me, he wanted a space to work from home, so I gave up my office for Oliver's study. And now I work in the living room. It's spacious enough for 2 people to live without any inconvenience. As I was thinking this, Laura, whom I was meeting for the first time after Rosalind, entered the house. "You're right, it's smaller than I thought. Are we going to live here together?" "It's small, but bear with it. They say any place becomes comfortable if you live in it. Well, it's better than nothing. I'll manage to live here." "How long do they intend to stay?" As I pondered vaguely, Oliver commanded me with an irritated voice.
Hey, what are you dozing off for? Hurry up and carry in my parents' luggage."
"What? Oh, sorry. Which ones are their luggage?" I thought it would be just enough luggage for a short stay, maybe a duffel bag. But when I looked inside the entrance, I couldn't find anything.
"What are you looking at? It's outside."
Rushing to the entrance, I saw about 10 cardboard boxes piled up in the hallway. Cardboard boxes for a visit to their son's house? I didn't understand the meaning, but leaving such things in the hallway would bother other residents. Fortunately, none of the boxes were too heavy, and I somehow managed to bring all of them into the living room by myself. Since it's a living dining area, it's quite spacious. Although it's obstructive, stacking them up secured enough space to place them. During this time, Oliver and the in-laws were sitting and talking.
"Make coffee once you're done with the luggage. Hurry up, everyone is tired."
I couldn't think properly due to the situation and moved reflexively to Oliver's words. "You really are so inconsiderate. I'm worried about our future."
"I'll sleep in this room."
While I was cluelessly making coffee, Laura declared our bedroom as her room. That's fine. I'll clean up the storage with Mom, and when we're done, we'll sleep together."
"It'll be nice to sleep with Oliver after a long time."
Sleeping closely with family, how nice. Oliver and his parents acted as if I didn't exist, enjoying their family time. Our house only has a bedroom, a storage room, and what now serves as Oliver's study, which was my former office. Where am I supposed to sleep? And how long will this lifestyle continue? It seems humans can't think properly when faced with situations far beyond their usual understanding. While I was stunned, everything had already ended. The next day, no, from the moment the in-laws moved in, hell began.
"Hey, isn't the food ready yet?"
"Sorry, I'm preparing it now." "You're really slow." Oliver must have a lot of patience to put up with someone like you. The in-laws lazed around the house all day, doing nothing, and treated me like a servant. At first, I endured it, thinking it would only be for a few days. But listening to the conversations between the in-laws and Oliver, it became clear that this was going to be a permanent situation, and I awakened. Here's the summary. The in-laws had fled from their hometown because Laura had returned home after getting divorced. The reason for the divorce was Laura's infidelity. She had affairs with multiple people. All of this came to light recently, and her ex-husband demanded compensation, which they couldn't afford, so they fled here. Oliver had told me that his in-laws owned their home, but that was a lie. Originally, that house belonged to Rosalind's real family, where her parents lived. Rosalind and Harrison moved in with them because they couldn't afford to live by themselves. And after Rosalind's parents passed away, they just stayed there. The real owner was Rosalind's brother, and he asked them to leave, but they stayed, claiming residency rights. Rosalind's brother had his own home, so he couldn't force his sister's family to move out. He had requested them to leave, but couldn't do no more than that. Then, with Laura returning with a mountain of compensation to pay, Rosalind and Harrison tried to sell the house to raise money. Rosalind's brother, upon learning the situation, was furious and threatened legal action. That's why the in-laws showed up at our place with all the belongings she could carry. Those belongings, 10 boxes of them, the ones I struggled to bring into our house the day they arrived, representing their entire fortune. I don't know what's inside, and frankly, I don't want to know, but it seems there's nothing of real value that could be called a fortune. In short, the in-laws moved in with us because they were broke. And it looks like they plan to live off of us indefinitely. In such a family, Oliver was miraculously smart. He was good at his studies and managed to graduate from college on a scholarship. You wouldn't guess he's part of that family just by looking at him. He continued to play the role of a refreshing, fine young man, got a job at a well-known company, and then met and married me. I couldn't see through Oliver's true nature or the real face of the in-laws. My parents had already passed away, so I'm all alone. But I'm working and already own a house. To Oliver, I must have seemed like a perfect target. No way, I'm not going to let this happen to myself. Now that I know everything, I refuse to quietly become their slave. I won't let this no-good family take advantage of me. I started planning my retaliation and took action the very next day. For now, I had to act submissive. I couldn't let Oliver or the in-laws catch on to my plan. I had to catch them off guard. Just like how they suddenly showed up here. After pretending to listen to the in-laws for about a week, one day, Laura said to me, "Give me some money," Laura demanded, extending her open right hand. She was so blatantly freeloading. It was irritating, but I had decided not to resist for now. I handed Laura a few bills.
"Is this all? Don't you have more?"
"I don't have more on me right now since this was sudden."
"Then a credit card will do."
"Absolutely not. If I gave her a card, there's no telling what she'd do with it." "I can't lend you a card. I'll withdraw some money from the bank tomorrow. Please wait until then." I managed to quiet the complaining in-laws by making that promise. I wouldn't give them the card no matter what. That night, after Oliver came home, he complained about it. "You could have just lent them the card. You're really stingy with money." I was appalled by his words, but I apologized, thinking it over. "I'm sorry. I thought there could be problems if something happened."
"Like what?"
"I was afraid of lending a card with a different name, and if Rosalind and Harrison got arrested for misuse, I couldn't do it." Oliver seemed satisfied with this reason.
"Then, make a family card for my mom and dad. I'm counting on you."
"Understood." I replied as such, but I had no intention of making one. About a month later, Oliver asked about the status of the family card. Maybe the in-laws, having received money several times, found it troublesome and urged Oliver to ask for the card. "I'm sorry, but it seems I can't make it," I said, feigning disappointment. I hadn't applied for a family card and wasn't disappointed at all.
"Why not?" Rosalind and the others are considered relatives, not family, so it doesn't work. Apparently, it's not okay just to live here temporarily. The in-laws had just rolled in without permission, and no proper arrangements had been made for living together. They haven't even changed the address registration, so it seems like there's no actual residence. I see. Faced with this explanation, Oliver seemed to have no choice but to accept. Well, then we just need to change the address registration. That's right, since we're going to live here anyway. Go ahead and take care of the procedures. What a nerve for them to order me to do so. About that, I think this house is a bit small for us to live in permanently. Now that you mention it, maybe that's why you haven't been coming home much lately. When I said that, Oliver looked a bit puzzled. I've been staying at hotels because I've been working late. Oh, that must be tough. So, I was thinking, why don't we move out of this house? Oliver and the in-laws were surprised by my suggestion. This house was originally bought for me to live alone, and while Oliver and I could barely make do, it's definitely too small in the current situation. Indeed. Look at this. Wouldn't you want to live in a house like this? I showed them the brochure for a new apartment. It was a recently completed high-rise building. The brochure featured photos of a top-floor apartment. Spacious, with large windows offering a view of the city below. How were you able to get an apartment like this? I thought our current place was too cramped, so I decided to go for it. I sold this place and added my parents' inheritance and savings to buy it. That's great. This place isn't bad, but that one is definitely better. Laura and Oliver, who had been looking skeptically, relaxed when they learned the payment was already complete. Wow, you've got some sense. I'm seeing you in a new light for the first time. Yeah, I guess I can acknowledge you as Oliver's wife. The in-laws nodded in agreement with smiles. And just like that, the move was settled smoothly. About a month later, the day of the move arrived. It was a bit sad to say goodbye to the house we had lived in for so long, but it was for a brighter future. Once the belongings were loaded into 2 trucks, we headed to our new destination. Upon arriving at the high-rise and speaking to the concierge, we were handed the keys to our apartment. To our top-floor apartment via the high-rise exclusive elevator. Wow, it's beautiful! Laura was the first to dash in, exclaiming as if dancing. Let's get unpacking. I called out, but no one offered to help. As expected, but still infuriating. The movers placed the brought items were directed, and I began unpacking alone. I'll take this spacious room. Katrina can have the tiny storage. The in-laws were assigning rooms as they pleased, but I ignored them and continued my work. This room is truly wonderful. A great choice for our final home. I'm glad you feel that way. Oliver and the in-laws were all smiles, exchanging such words. It's like a dream to live in a house like this, Laura said, teary-eyed. Now, it might be a good time for the reveal. Huh? Whose house are you talking about? Huh? A good moment to show the in-laws reality. Why would you all live here? What are you talking about? It's our new home. We're the ones who will live here. Huh? I feigned exaggerated surprise. This isn't your house. I bought this place to live with my grandparents. You asked if we wanted to live in a house like this. Laura began to make a scene, raising her voice. Yes, I did ask if you wanted to live here, but that's all I did. I never said you could live here. Just as I said, I never mentioned living together. Who would want to live with these people forever? So, please leave now. I am the owner of this house. The landlord is telling you to leave. Please comply before things get complicated. Don't be ridiculous.
Oliver stomped his feet in anger, his face turning red.
The only thing you should be doing is listening to me. My family and I will live in this house. If you don't like it, you should leave. That's right, get out. That's right, leave.
Oliver and the in-laws were pressuring me to leave. I contacted the concierge directly through the intercom on the wall.
Excuse me, there are some strange people refusing to leave my house and trying to kick me out, the actual resident. Please come immediately.
As soon as I finished speaking, a siren sounded throughout the room.
What's this? So noisy. Make it stop right now.
The security staff arrived promptly after the alert. This is a high-end condominium after all.
These people are the building security. If you don't leave now, I'll call the police next.
When the security officer pressed the doorbell and asked what happened, the in-laws started panicking. They realized what I said wasn't a lie. Although the security staff arrived, the in-laws pleaded, crawling on the ground, asking to be heard. I decided to listen, curious about what Oliver had been telling them. Oliver had been telling the in-laws I was a pitiable woman with no relatives, and that I couldn't live without him. So that's why he was keeping me here. And that they could use me as they pleased, like a housekeeper. That was what he had been telling his own parents. I felt sympathy for the in-laws who provided such valuable testimony. Actually, when I gave money to the in-laws, I made them sign a paper with the amount written on it. Essentially, it was a promissory note. I want proof that I've handed it over properly to show Oliver. Otherwise, I'll get in trouble. If you sign it, I'll give you as much as you want. Knowing they could get as much money as they wanted just by signing, the in-laws easily complied. Thanks to that, I had proof of how much I had lent them. I had been thinking of collecting from the in-laws, but it seemed impossible for them to pay back. So I decided to take it from Oliver instead and thought it best to evict them from the apartment. Thanks to this, you've helped me a lot. If you leave now, I'll consider this never happened, but if you come back, you'll have to pay everything all at once. As I showed them the promissory note and said this, the in-laws finally gave up and left.
I'm Katrina's husband. I have the right to live here. I won't leave.
Oliver refused to move. If that's how you feel, let's settle this here and now.
All right, let's have a little talk then. But if you try anything funny, I'll call them right back.
I thanked the security guards and sent them back home.
Why are you doing this? Did you dislike my family that much?
Of course I do. They suddenly show up, treating me like slaves in a sneak attack. I made it clear to Oliver. Fine. If you dislike them that much, I'll tell my mom and dad to leave. But I can stay, right? I was astounded. He was planning to abandon his in-laws just so he could stay. What a despicable man. No, you need to leave too.
Why? We're married, aren't we?
I presented Oliver with a folder.
What is this?
Oliver turned pale as he looked inside the folder. A pretty woman, isn't she? I heard you've been living together for half the week lately. It was evidence of Oliver's affair. There were tons of photos of the two looking cozy, arm in arm, walking together, entering a hotel. Oliver had started dating her right after marrying me.
I heard you had plans to live with her in that apartment once we were separated. Lies! Who would say such a thing?
I turned on the voice recorder I was holding. The voice of the other woman played, and Oliver froze. The evidence was obtained by a detective agency. They approached the woman, kindly informed her that Oliver was married, and recorded what she had to say. The woman proudly claimed that Oliver was in the midst of divorce proceedings, and once he kicked out his wife, they would live together in Oliver's apartment. Oliver told his affair partner he wanted to divorce, but I wouldn't agree, and after being worn out by the in-laws, I would quietly leave. The affair partner believed she was the only one Oliver loved, thinking the marriage had already cooled off. True love will prevail, she laughed. But when she realized she was talking to someone from a detective agency, she panicked and started to cover for herself. She claimed she was also deceived by Oliver, truly believing the marriage was over. She begged for forgiveness, promising to tell everything. The detective asked me what to do, and upon saying it depended on what she said, she spilled everything not even asked for. All of that was recorded. I guess true love seems quite fragile.
Yes, I got the evidence. Looks like this is going to cost a pretty penny in damages.
Oliver collapsed weakly onto the floor.
Your stuff is already sent to that woman's condo, so you can start living there from today. Now, leave.
I called the concierge again and had Oliver, who was still drained, thrown out. As promised, I decided not to delve further into the affair partner. Her testimony was enough to prove Oliver's maliciousness. Thanks to that, I was able to get a substantial amount in damages from Oliver. It was enough to forgive him. However, I made sure to inform the woman's parents and her company. I hadn't promised not to tell anyone, so it should be fine to talk. The woman was Oliver's junior at work. They got close as they worked together. It would have been a nice story if they weren't married. I complained to the company about what kind of employee training they were providing, which led to our divorce. The company apologized for the lack of supervision. Concerned about their social reputation, the company made the woman resign under the guise of voluntary resignation. Oliver was demoted and transferred from the head office to a subsidiary as a punishment. During work hours, the two of them would concoct lies about sales meetings and sneak off to hotels. Or take trips together and claim them as business expenses. Given the harm they caused the company, such actions seemed justified to them. I heard through the grapevine that the in-laws are now living together in her apartment for real. It's your fault things have ended up like this, take responsibility. That's what they say, squatting in the condominium where Oliver and the woman live. Oliver and the woman had to take out loans to pay me compensation. Now they live a difficult life, struggling every day to repay their debt. It might be about time to finally kick the in-laws out, I suppose. Oliver thought I was just some pitiful woman, burdened with grandparents who were in a care facility, but the reality was a bit different. My grandparents were indeed in a facility, but it was a luxurious place where wealthy people live gracefully. They used to run a company and had planned to pass it on to my parents, but they died young. So they retired after handing it over to someone they could trust. That was the year I graduated from college. I've loved drawing since I was a child and have won numerous awards for it. I told my grandparents I wanted to work in art, so they never forced me to take over the company. They decided to move into that facility so I could live freely as I wished. I followed my dreams into a career related to art, and now I'm becoming known as a children's book author. My illustrated books have become a big hit, and I'm now somewhat of a celebrity. I feel like my luck has turned around dramatically since splitting up with Oliver. He must be regretting it by now. I bought that high-rise apartment with the money from selling that condo, my parents' inheritance, and my book royalties. I wanted to live with my grandparents again while they were still healthy. Of course, I'm keeping the facility as an option. It's necessary for when either of my grandparents becomes physically incapacitated and needs extensive care. But for now, they're both still healthy. Thanks to my book sales, I can finally give back to my grandparents. We can live happily together for a while longer. Though I went through some hardships because of that man, my future is looking bright. Finally, my sister Whitney has given birth. Our family was overjoyed. and even though it wasn't Christmas, relatives gathered together. The stars of the show were, of course, Whitney and her baby. With food and drinks ready, the party began. After we all toasted, my husband Brad approached Whitney and the baby. Whitney handed the baby to Brad, and he held the baby in his arms. Brad looked at the baby with such a loving gaze, as if he were holding his own child.
"Hello, baby. Oh, you're so cute."
After admiring the baby, he turned to me and said, "If only you could actually have kids." Followed by a sigh.
"Still really cute. Wonder who it looks like."
He insulted me in front of all the relatives, seemingly unaware of the icy atmosphere that followed. In the frozen silence, the family gathered around Brad and Whitney, enclosing them. Whitney and Brad, engrossed with the baby, hadn't noticed until Whitney's husband Chuck spoke up.
"It really doesn't seem to take after me. There are elements of Whitney, though."
He confronted Brad calmly. It seemed Whitney and Brad finally noticed the awkward air. Surrounded by relatives, they looked to be huddling together. "Overall, Brad, it seems to take after you, don't you think?" Donald, Brad's dad, added insult to injury.
"Really now? Brad, it's the spitting image of you when you were little."
His tone was cold, unfitting for the celebration.
Eh?
Seeing Brad taken aback, I couldn't help but let out a smile. Brad had no idea that I had been laying the groundwork with the relatives. I'm Zoe, 42 years old. My life has been nothing extraordinary. Not academically gifted, nor athletically talented. Not the type to stand out, I've probably been forgotten by my classmates, leading a plain life. I have a younger sister, Whitney. Unlike me, Whitney is beautiful and stylish. Though our age difference spared me from blatant comparisons, from what I saw, Whitney was adored by many from a young age. Becoming a show-off in elementary school worked to her advantage, making her a central figure in her class. People gravitated towards her, regardless of gender, and after school, friends were always coming over. As she grew older, perhaps thinking little of my plainness, Whitney would say, "Zoe, you're so plain. Make sure not to show your face when my friends are over." Ignoring me even when her friends weren't around. Confused by Whitney's attitude and feeling uneasy around my own sister, I decided to move out. I had a job lined up and had saved some money from working part-time while attending college. So I moved out without anyone stopping me. It was lonely at times, but being alone was more comfortable than being nagged by Whitney. Occasionally, when I visited home, I heard from Mom that Whitney's behavior seemed to be getting worse year by year. By the time she was in high school, Whitney started going after people's boyfriends. And Mom would come to me for advice. But since I had no experience with love, all I could do was try to console Mom. In the end, Whitney never changed, and Mom's worries never ceased. I became close to a senior coworker while working together on a project. His name was Brad. He was 2 years older than me, someone I had been on the same team with since the last project. I had never been approached by men before, but after the project ended and we all went out for drinks, he asked for my contact information. Even while drinking, I was the sober one, taking care of drunk colleagues and supporting the organizer, which apparently caught his attention.
"How about we go out for dinner, just the two of us?"
Thinking he had asked for my contact for work-related reasons, I was surprised by his sudden invitation. Finding no reason to decline and thinking this would be a one-time thing, I accepted his invitation. However, when we actually sat down to eat and talk, we got along so well that time flew by. Unable to suppress the feeling that I didn't want it to end with just this once, I found myself saying, "May I have the pleasure of inviting you out next time," in a surprising move. Perhaps it was the alcohol talking. I was flustered after saying those words. Brad looked stunned. Oh no.
I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. I meant for work advice, not that. I didn't have any ulterior motive.
I rushed to explain, wanting to run away from the embarrassment. Then, ulterior motive. You're an interesting person, Zoe. Brad burst out laughing.
I'd be happier if it was with ulterior motives.
Suddenly serious, Brad took my arm. Shall we go to another place? I quietly nodded and followed Brad. I'll never forget that night. Even after we got married, we would laugh about it when recalling that time. My first love at 28 felt embarrassing, but he accepted me and took the lead. With him, my once plain life seemed to blossom into something beautiful. At 28, I finally understood what love was, and I gained confidence. 2 years later, he proposed, and we got married. Me, Zoe, 30 years old. Married at a nice round age. And with a new name, I decided to start a new life. I got along well with Brad's parents, especially Mael, as if we were friends. The common mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict was non-existent for us. Whitney, attending our wedding, seemed enraptured by the atmosphere, barely acknowledging me. After the ceremony, as Brad and I were heading to the next venue, Whitney ran up to us.
Zoe! Today's wedding was so beautiful. It makes me want to get married soon too.
Any past resentment seemed gone. Whitney smiled at me.
It's about time I settled down too. Not just any man will do. I'll find the right one and have a wedding that everyone can celebrate.
It seemed our wedding made her crave a normal happiness. Declaring her intention to change, Whitney left. I was stunned by our brief exchange, but wanted to believe in her words of change. If my image had cast a positive light on Whitney, then I was satisfied. Feeling that years of resentment had dissipated made me genuinely happy. I looked forward to having face-to-face conversations in the future. Since my marriage, Mom's worries shifted from Whitney to me. Yes, about children. Getting married at 30, I understood my parents' eagerness to see grandchildren. Of course, I wanted children too. I was working but planned to quit if I had a child. Initially, I hadn't thought deeply about it, but as time went on, I grew tired of Mom's constant nudging. Wanting to respond to my parents' feelings, I began to excessively consult with Brad. Initially, Brad took it lightly, saying, "Don't rush, it'll happen when it's meant to." However, as I repeatedly brought up the same concerns,
"Come on, I'm tired today. Let's not talk about this anymore,"
he started to visibly show his annoyance. 5 years into our marriage, we hadn't had children, and by that time, Brad seemed to have given up. I was 35 before I knew it. Nowadays, it's not uncommon for people older than me to have children. But I knew I was reaching the age where I had to prepare myself. I knew that if we truly wanted children, we would have to undergo the appropriate tests and treatments. And I was aware of how difficult that could be. Brad was saying, even without children, we have the option to enjoy life together. But I couldn't give up. Should we try getting tested, just once? Holding on to a last hope, I asked Brad. Brad was reluctant but agreed to go to the hospital. Perhaps thinking that if a problem was identified with either of us, I would give up. However, Brad's attitude became colder after we went for the tests. When we went back to the hospital to get the results, I understood why Brad was being cold. The issue with not being able to have children was on Brad's side. Unable to accept the test results, perhaps because of his pride, Brad started to take out his frustration on me. Unable to maintain a happy relationship, all I could do was wait for him to calm down. 3 years later, Brad's demeanor had improved compared to back then. But he still came home late or not at all sometimes. By that time, Whitney had finally found someone to marry. It had been 8 years since our wedding, and it seemed she had struggled a lot during that time. Her habit of playing around since her younger days was hard to break. And even when she found someone good, she would quickly lose interest, so relationships didn't last. However, the man Whitney found this time was broad-minded enough to accept all of her past actions. Moreover, we learned at their wedding that Whitney's husband was an elite businessman working for a major trading company. How they met and got to the point of marriage was unclear, but seeing Whitney happy reminded me of my own early marriage days. I hadn't imagined things turning out this way back then. Still, I believed that marrying Brad was my happiness. Even without children, we could still make it as a couple. Watching Whitney in her wedding dress, I reaffirmed my love for Brad in my heart. Realizing that children were not in the cards for Brad and me, Mom shifted her hopes to Whitney. Honestly, I was relieved to no longer be pressured by Mom. Whitney was still in her 20s and likely to meet Mom's expectations. Somewhere inside, I too had hopes for Whitney. 3 years later, the grandchild Mom had been longing for was finally on its way, growing inside Whitney. Mom cried and thanked Whitney when she found out. Hearing this news, I felt like my worries were finally over. It had been such a long journey to this day. My relationship with Brad wasn't great, but I hoped this could be a turning point. We hadn't spoken much lately. Whenever he did open his mouth, it was only to make snide remarks, but Brad's attitudes seemed to change when he learned about Whitney's pregnancy. Perhaps he felt guilty towards my mom for us not being able to have children. As Whitney's belly grew, conversations with Brad increased. Whitney's due date was drawing close. At home, the anticipation for the first grandchild made Dad and Mom restless. And then, Whitney finally gave birth. Our family was overjoyed, and relatives gathered together even though it wasn't Christmas. Attending Whitney's baby shower were Brad and me. Brad's parents, Whitney and my dad and mom, and Whitney's husband Chuck and his parents. It was the first time so many relatives had gathered together. The stars of the show were, of course, Whitney and her baby. I was busy in the kitchen preparing the food and drinks. With everything ready, the party started. After we all toasted, Brad approached Whitney and the baby. Whitney handed the baby to Brad, and he held the baby in his arms. Normally, showing a baby to relatives would be a common sight, but something felt off. Brad looked at the baby with such a loving gaze, as if he were holding his own child. The affection he showed towards his wife's sister's child seemed a bit too intense. Without caring about that, Brad held the baby and murmured,
"Hello, baby. Ah, you're so cute."
After showering the baby with love, he turned to me and bitterly said, "If only you could actually have kids." Followed by a sigh.
"Still really cute. Wonder who it looks like."
He insulted me in front of all the relatives, seemingly unaware of the icy atmosphere that followed. In the frozen silence, my dad, Brad's parents, Chuck, and his parents gathered around Brad and Whitney, enclosing them. Whitney and Brad, engrossed with the baby, hadn't noticed until Chuck finally spoke up.
"Really, it doesn't seem to take after me. It seems to have few similarities with Whitney too."
He calmly confronted Brad. It seemed Whitney and Brad finally noticed the awkward air. Surrounded by relatives, they appeared to be huddling together.
"Overall, Brad, it seems to take after you, don't you think?"
Brad's dad added to the tension, saying,
"Indeed. Brad, it's the spitting image of you when you were little."
His voice was cold, inappropriate for the celebration. Seeing Brad taken aback, I couldn't help but smile. Brad was unaware that I had been laying the groundwork with the relatives. Months ago, I happened to see Brad's mobile phone. That day, I had taken the morning off to go to the hospital and found Brad's phone left on the dining table. Thinking to deliver it to him at work later, I was about to put it in my bag when the phone vibrated. Curiosity led me to glance at the screen, displaying a message from Whitney.
"Your baby is growing bigger."
My blood ran cold. Next, I was seething with anger. Whitney was trying to steal Brad. Given Whitney's past behavior, there was no doubt in my mind. To confirm, I looked at the message exchange between Whitney and Brad. It was an affair. Whitney planned to pass Brad's child as Chuck's. Brad was waiting for the right time to divorce me and remarry Whitney. I took photos of the message exchange as evidence. Since then, I've acted oblivious. Brad's parents believed me immediately due to our close relationship. They also felt sorry for their son's actions. I approached Chuck about it once before Whitney gave birth. He seemed to have had suspicions about Whitney's pregnancy. Showing him the evidence, he agreed to my plan. And so, we've come to this moment. Brad, caught off guard, while Whitney smiled brightly.
"Stop it, everyone, that's such a bad joke,"
she said, feigning innocence.
"Would you stop your bad jokes?"
The voice trembled with anger. I felt sorry for asking everyone to play along until now. And Whitney seemed to finally sense the deep loathing in his angry voice. Whitney's complexion changed. Noticing this, Brad stepped in to defend her. "Hey, Whitney's just tired from giving birth. No need to speak like that." I confronted Brad, fueled by the future he planned for his mistress. "I see you can be kind for the sake of your future wife." I showed him the screen of his mobile phone. The photo of the message exchange with Whitney. Brad, shocked then glaring, yelled,
"What the hell is this?"
He stood up, grabbing me by the collar.
"When did you start doing such dirty things?"
He didn't even try to make excuses. It would have been better if he had tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding. When he raised his fist at me, Chuck intervened.
"Stop raising your hand to a woman."
The grip Chuck had on Brad's arm was forceful. Brad shook off his hand and retorted in frustration.
"Saying that. Aren't you two the ones in a shady relationship?"
Retreating while rubbing his grabbed arm. Whitney, seizing the moment, jumped into the fray.
"Yeah. Instead of doubting Brad and me, you should be looking into these too."
However, it seemed like no one was listening to her. The silence was broken by me and Whitney's dad. "Enough, Whitney." Dad had always been a man of few words. He was gentle and, according to Mom, sometimes too soft, never getting angry at Whitney's misbehavior. But this time, he couldn't stay silent. "It's your bad habit, isn't it? I thought you had changed after getting married, but stealing your sister's husband." Dad spoke quietly but with a voice as cold as ice to Whitney. "I should have scolded you more. I didn't want you to see me like this." After giving me a sorrowful look, Dad slapped Whitney's cheek hard.
"Ouch!"
Looking down at Whitney holding her cheek, he sighed and then turned to Brad.
"No, Donald. It's not like that. This is all a misunderstanding."
Brad finally tried to defend himself just as Dad's fist hit him. Brad crumpled to the ground. Then, Dad loudly said to them,
"The pain you're feeling is nothing compared to what Zoe and Chuck went through. Do you understand?"
Whitney's sobbing could be heard, though it was doubtful if her tears were from remorse. Dad turned to Chuck and his parents to apologize deeply. "I'm truly sorry for the unforgivable act my daughter has committed." Mom also apologized next to Dad. Then to Brad's parents, "I'm sorry for raising my hand to Brad in front of you," apologizing deeply once again. Brad's parents also apologized to us.
"What is this? I did nothing wrong."
Brad began to shout, breaking the silence.
It's all because Zoe is infertile.
What a pitiful sight.
So, it's not my fault.
Whitney also started to struggle.
It's Zoe's fault. Having such a wonderful husband but not being able to bear children. So I decided to have his child instead.
Whitney seemed to realize midway. No one was on their side. Cold stares were fixed on them. I decided to make it clear. Listen, Whitney. I struggled to keep my anger from seeping into my gentle tone. The cause of infertility wasn't me.
Wah!
Whitney was stunned. We had fertility tests done. Everyone listened silently to my voice. The results showed that Brad was the cause. The room went quiet.
Wah! No, that.
Whitney's eyes began to dart around. A habit when she's hiding something.
Brad? That's a lie, right?
Whitney confronted Brad, but he was deflated.
I don't accept those test results.
Brad couldn't accept that he was the one unable to have children, but I showed the hospital's test result papers. Dad and Mom looked at the evidence, and from Whitney's reaction, it seemed they realized something.
Whitney, whose child is that baby really?
Delivering the final blow.
It's Chuck's child, obviously.
She seemed unaware that her story was changing by the moment.
Then, to put Chuck's mind at ease, why not do a DNA test?
Whitney's eyes darted around nervously.
There's no need for that. It's Chuck's child.
Mom approached Whitney, speaking to her with the gentleness one uses with a small child. Whitney, let's get tested, shall we? I want to believe you, Whitney. Let me believe you this time. Her voice trembled towards the end. Mom was sobbing, huddled over.
You're old enough, Whitney. It's time to take responsibility.
Dad told Whitney, then apologized again to everyone gathered. He promised to report the results later, and Whitney's baby celebration party came to an end. Whitney stubbornly refused the DNA test, but her attitude only spurred our parents more. Dad tried to persuade Whitney himself, but she wasn't willing to listen. Eventually, without Whitney's consent, the test was forcibly conducted. Meanwhile, I had moved out of the house I shared with Brad. Brad, still not accepting his infertility, joked, "So, Whitney will move in after you leave." But I was already starting the divorce proceedings, undistracted. Months after the family gathering, Mom contacted me about Whitney's DNA test results. We were to return to our parents' house to hear the outcome. Brad, Chuck, and I listened intently to the results, which were unexpected by all. A heavy sigh escaped everyone's lips. The father of Whitney's child was neither Chuck nor Brad.
What on earth does this mean?
Dad couldn't contain his anger. Even more furious than when he had slapped Whitney.
What does this mean, you say?
Whitney asked rhetorically, but no one supported her.
Whitney, explain yourself.
Chuck admonished her in a low voice. Resigned, perhaps realizing she couldn't escape the truth any longer, Whitney explained in a small voice.
I don't know who the father is. Chuck was so busy with work right after we got married, and I felt so lonely.
Her voice gradually turned whiny.
It's not my fault Chuck made me feel lonely, right? The child is innocent. Let's pretend that night never happened. Please.
Whitney moved closer to Chuck, not Brad.
So, what about you and Brad?
Chuck asked gently.
Right. Brad was just for fun. I was entertaining him because things weren't going well with Zoe.
Whitney glanced at Brad and laughed. Besides, Brad may come from a wealthy family, but he's so stingy. He never spoiled me. Chuck, you're the only one for me. Whitney clung to Chuck's arm. Brad, faced with the realization of his infertility and Whitney's abandonment, was just staring blankly. "So it is," Chuck muttered softly, then forcefully shook off Whitney's clinging arm. Whitney fell off the couch, but Chuck stood up, towering over her. "I've had enough. Talking to you any further is a waste of time." His eyes filled with hatred and sorrow. "Dad and Mom said, we'll send the divorce papers later. Thank you for everything up to now." Without giving Whitney another look, Chuck left the house. "It's the expected outcome," Mom said, placing a hand on Whitney's shoulder.
"From now on, you're nothing to me. Leave this house immediately."
Mom had always ultimately accepted Whitney despite her behavior. But this time it seemed she had reached her limit. "I've been too lenient. But don't worry, I won't bother with you anymore. Live strong on your own." We had never seen Mom react so coldly before. But her resolve seemed firm, as if she had come to a clear decision. Dad agreed with her decision, and it was decided that Whitney would be kicked out of the house. "So, how long do you plan to stay here?" I asked Brad, who was left behind. Brad slowly looked up at me. Then, as if realizing something too late, he asked, "Zoe, that kid wasn't mine, right?"
"If so, I'm innocent. Whitney was just playing around, as she said. So, why don't we call off the divorce and start over?"
I was speechless. After all the mocking, he had the nerve to say that.
"I have no intention of starting over with you. I wish I never have to see you again. So please, leave this house right now."
I grabbed a mop nearby and hit Brad with it.
"Get out now!"
I shouted as I chased him out. Later, I finalized the divorce with Brad. I had gotten along well with Mil and wanted to keep in touch, but it wasn't to be. Mil and I had a farewell meal together, mourning our separation. Upon learning of my divorce with Brad, Whitney, who had been hesitant, agreed to divorce Chuck and finally left the family home. She seemed to intend to move in with Brad, but he refused her. Brad, too, was no longer in a position to support Whitney financially. After our divorce, Brad left his job due to discomfort at our shared workplace. He tried to help with the family business but became estranged from his family and is now looking for new employment while surviving on part-time work. Of course, with alimony payments to me, his life is far from easy. Whitney moving in would be nothing but a nuisance, especially considering she played with his feelings. Shunned by her family, abandoned by Brad, and pursued by Chuck for alimony, Whitney began to drift through the night streets, escaping from everything. But she wasn't the type to attract ordinary men anymore. Once relying on her beauty, post-pregnancy Whitney did nothing to restore her figure, losing all remnants of her past glory. Unable to escape the glory of being adored in her youth, she became obsessed with a man she met in a nightclub. Drowning in debt and resorting to selling herself, she has fallen to a point of no return. Dad and Mom hired a detective agency to track Whitney's whereabouts, determined never to let her return home. They sold the family home and moved to a condominium in the next town. Mom, sharing this with me, looked sad but resolved not to extend a helping hand to Whitney. If her life were in danger, that'd be different. But that's it. We've decided not to do anything more. Mom's too gentle to bear Whitney's current state, but knows extending help again wouldn't lead to her reform. This is what being a mom is about. Though I never had children of my own, witnessing Mom's compassion and strength fills me with respect. Dad and Mom have taken in Whitney's child, who is nearly 2 years old. His rapid growth is astonishing, and I've been experiencing childcare during visits to my parents' house. I wonder what kind of adult this child without Dad or Mom will become. Yet, I'm determined to shower him with enough love to never feel lesser for it. Today, once again, I received an email from Mom about Whitney's child. We are planning to go on a trip together on the next day off. On my way home from work, I looked up at the night sky and wished for the child's growth. May he grow up to be honest, bright, and earnest. And then, I returned to my solitary apartment, where no one waits.